Tom, you may be on mute.
Good
Okay,
evening,
hello,
everyone.
everybody. Sorry about that.
Good evening. Hi, Tom Carey. Welcome.
How's everybody? Sorry about that.
No, don't apologize. I'm just getting started. So welcome, everyone. I'm calling to order the joint meeting of the Indian Point Closure Task Force and the Decommissioning Oversight Board. I'm Tom Congdon with the Department of Public Service and the chair of the task force and the Oversight Board. Very briefly for today's meeting, I want to go through some logistics. All attendee lines are muted upon entry. Public statements will be accepted at the end of the meeting. Participants who pre-registered to speak, given first priority, other statements accepted as time allows. The chat will be reviewed following the meeting, and we will endeavor to answer all the questions in the chat through our written Q&A that we post on our website. If you have sound issues, select options next to unmute. For the best audio experience, select call me. And if you have issues joining, please call 1-800-342-3330. Next slide. In the interest of time, I'm going to do a roll call, but I'm going to skip all of the state agency representatives who are listed here. So I'll start with Senator Pete Harcum.
Here.
Assemblywoman Galiff. Supervisor Becker.
Here.
Mayor Knickerbocker. Susan Spear from Westchester County.
Here.
Catherine Borgia.
Here.
Colin Smith. Joe Hochreiter.
Here.
Our labor representatives, Bill Smith.
Here.
Tom Carey.
Here.
Lou Picani. All right, so Lou is on with Tom Kaczmarek, and I think is having some technical difficulties. I want to turn to our environmental and technical experts. Dave Lockbaum, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
And Richard Webster from Riverkeeper. Okay, so Tom Kaczmarek, if you can just try to get in touch with Rich Webster. I see Mayor Knickerbocker's joined us.
Yes, I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. We have a very packed agenda tonight. We have, again, in the interest of time and in response to some community feedback, we are not going to have presentations tonight on our task force business. I sent a letter to the task force members this week that provides an update on the cessation fund and on the community benefit fund. Both work streams are on track and the funds are flowing, so I think it's all good news there. I would ask the task force members to look at that update. If you have any questions or feedback, let Tom Kaczmarek know. Under our statute for the task force, we do have to file an annual report providing updates to the legislature. So Tom Kaczmarek will be using the updates that you all have in your inbox to contribute to that report. If you have any questions, again, let Tom know. That report will be filed for public comment on April 30th. For tonight's agenda, beyond the task force work, we've got a lot of Decommissioning Oversight Board presentation for you tonight. I'm going to start with Tom Kaczmarek with some administrative updates. I'm going to turn to Richard Webster and Dave Lockbaum on work they've been doing to improve community engagement. Joe Hochreiter has a few updates from the School Monitoring Working Group. Then we'll turn to a discussion on pipeline safety. We're really pleased to have a guest speaker tonight, Rick Kuprowitz, recommended by several folks in the community as well as our local elected officials. Rick has done a lot of work in our region pertaining to the pipelines that run in close proximity to Indian Point, is a national expert on these issues, and we look forward to hearing from him. Also hearing from Rich Baroni and our own DPS pipeline safety staff for that discussion. Then we'll turn to Rich Baroni for updates from Holtec on decommissioning. We'll also hear from a few of our agency representatives on some oversight activities that they've been doing. Then we'll turn to the public statement portion of the meeting. We have a number of pre-registered speakers for that section, more than we've had in the last couple of meetings. So I do want to try to work our way through this agenda as quickly and efficiently as we can without obviously missing important details. But if everyone can please keep that in mind, that we want to reserve at least 45 minutes to an hour at the end of our presentations to hear from the public. Next slide, please. I know Tom Kazmarek is busy right now working to get some additional folks on the call, but I'll ask Tom, are you prepared to give this portion of the presentation, or would you like me to handle it?
I am currently helping Mr. Webster join.
Okay.
If you want to get started, I can
Yeah, I
jump
can
in.
take it. No, I'm happy to take it. Next slide, please. So since our first couple of meetings, we've heard from a number of folks from the community and from our elected officials, from DOB members directly, with a lot of feedback on our processes, and we welcome that feedback. And we've tried to incorporate as many of those recommendations as possible in a number of administrative improvements. So first, to have more clarity around our meetings, we set the schedule for the entire year, including additional meetings. As you know, our bylaws require a minimum of 3 meetings a year. We've upped that to 5 this year, at least. We obviously have some working group meetings that take place in between, a lot of oversight activity as well. But these will be at the minimum 5 of these formal DOB meetings of the group, and here are the dates. We've also heard a lot of good recommendations for guest speakers. We're starting that tonight with Rick Kuprowitz from AccuFacts, and we will definitely entertain recommendations for expert speakers on other topics as well at future meetings. With respect to community engagement, we are working with our volunteer experts on our DOB, Rich Webster and Dave Lockbaum, who are both working with community members to make sure that they're soliciting their feedback and ideas for agenda topics, discussion topics, answering questions that the community members have in between meetings. And they are going to present more on that later on in the agenda. There's requests that we post video recordings of our meetings in a more timely way. We will be doing that on the next business day after our meetings. We also got a request to improve our website. Up until today, we've been using the Department of Public Services website, which is really geared towards our regulatory proceedings. It works very well for managing a large volume of documents, but is not, I admit, the most user-friendly interface. And so we hear that. We launched today a new website that's within the Department of Public Service site, but that will have more readily available information for users, still tied into our document management system, which is a really good vehicle for the voluminous documents that we have, including our Q&As that we prepare between meetings, all the correspondence that we've had with Holtec, and other documents. So we encourage you to still work within that system, but there's a better landing page for you, and hopefully that will improve the user experience. And lastly, here we have folks have requested an email listserv of some kind to get updates on meeting notices and the like. We have had that already in place. It's a part of the DPS website. We will have clarified instructions for how people can utilize that function so that they can take advantage of the automatic updates. What's nice about the function, if you can go through, follow the instructions and sign up, is that anytime there's a document posted into our system, you will be notified of that so that you can go and look and see what's been posted. Next slide, please. To that end, this is the button to click on our website. When you go to subscribe to service list and you enter your information, that will generate automatic emails to you whenever there's an update to our docket. Next slide, please. Also importantly, for us at the Department of Public Service and for the Decommissioning Oversight Board, Senator Harcum and Assemblywoman Galiff had recommended that the department consider hiring a resident inspector. We fully agreed with that recommendation, and we recommended that the governor include in her budget a line for us to make that hire. We are in the process now of recruiting a qualified candidate. You'll hear more about that later on in the agenda. Having a resident inspector, I will just say, I think will be enormously valuable, not only to the Department of Public Service for purposes of ensuring compliance with the joint proposal approved by the Public Service Commission, but it will also be enormously valuable, I think, to the Decommissioning Oversight Board as a whole to hear regular updates on oversight activities. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm not sure if Richard Webster's been able to sign in yet.
Yes, I have, Tom. I'm here.
Oh, wonderful. Welcome, Richard. So I want to turn it over to you at this stage to discuss your efforts and Dave's along with all of us on the DOB to improve community engagement. So Richard, I'll turn it over to you.
Right. Okay. Well, first of all, thank goodness I sympathize with those who have trouble getting onto this WebEx platform, because I just had a little trouble myself. So that's one thing that the community has mentioned before, but we're trying to work with it, and eventually it's worked for me. So basically, we've heard a number of concerns from a number of people. I do want to thank the community for being so engaged, and you know, this is helping us set the agenda really for the DOB, because you know, community concerns really are driving the agenda here, and we can't address everything obviously in one meeting, but we want to make sure that we capture the community concerns and that we have a plan for how to go through them. And so, you know, one concern that's been, I know, to the forefront of many people's minds has been the AIM pipeline. And to that end, we have speakers on the agenda today talking about the AIM pipeline. And I think hopefully that'll be helpful. But that is an issue that we hear a lot about. We believe that we've been somewhat responsive. We've been looking to ensure that the activities on the decommissioning site don't impact the pipeline. But I recognize that that the community members would like to see more, and are working with the federal government to try to get more. The other issues that we've heard about, obviously the school has been a major concern, and particularly with parents with children at the school. We have been working, Dave in particular has done sterling work to try to improve monitoring at the school, to make sure that we have monitoring that works and that protects the kids. Dave, do you want to say anything about that?
Well, just the only thing I'll add to that is I looked at Three Mile Island and the experience in cleaning up from that accident in 1979. And there were 3 separate community or citizen radiation networks set up because there was loss of confidence in both the company and the regulator. And what I learned from that was people can believe what they see easier than they can believe their ears and what they're told. So I think those networks helped the community understand what was going on and what wasn't going on. And I think that will also help inform decisions about what to do about Indian Point.
Great, thanks. Yeah, we did manage to secure a little bit of funding from the Indian Point Community Fund to go towards monitoring, which I hope will be helpful. And I think, those two agenda points, I'm going to say a couple more, but I think I just want to say that those two agenda points sort of set the tone, which is, we can address these issues. We can often mitigate these issues, but very often there will be some gap between what the community would like and what the regulators can do, in both in terms of their legal remit and in terms of what they believe is a reasonable remit. And so we're looking to close that gap as far as we can, but I want to be realistic, and particularly on the radiological safety side, the NRC is extremely unresponsive, as you know, and so getting them to move is a lot of work. But I think that shedding some transparency on the matter and some sunlight on the matter can help to get some voluntary commitments from Holtec at times. So the other issues that we've heard about are evacuation plans. Who's responsible for what? In other words, if there's a problem at the site, does Holtec have to address it, or would it be addressed by local first responders? If there's a problem with the pipeline, what does the pipeline have to do? And I acknowledge that's an area where there's a lot of there's a lack of clarity, and I think we could profitably spend some time looking at who's required to do what in first response, and informing community members about what their first port of call is for any different kind of accident. Site cleanup is one that I've heard quite a bit about. People are concerned about the long-term site cleanup, and I have to say, we, i.e. Riverkeeper, we are too. We want to make sure it's done right. But my understanding of that is that the first step is a site assessment, which will be done under the supervision of DEC. And then when the site assessment is done, then we'll move into the debate about exactly how best to clean the site up. I don't know if the DEC reps want to say anything about that.
Actually, I think later on in the agenda, Kelly Turturro will talk about the consent order and the next steps on that front. So that one is on the agenda for tonight.
Great, there you go. Right. So, perfect. So thanks, Tom. I should have known that, but so we are looking at. I should say that generally, the site cleanup is under the auspices of the DEC and RCRA, because we got that settlement in the joint proposal, which I think was a very good settlement. That's a very strong element of the settlement, and so it's good to have full state oversight. But of course, that doesn't mean that we, the community members, can rest on our laurels. We want to make sure that the state does a good job, and I'm sure with us watching, they will do a very good job. Monitoring we've done. So relevant to cleanup, the other issue that we've heard about is concerns about dust, and particularly questions about tenting. Can we tent the site so that dust is enclosed? And I think the answer there, well, we'll probably hear the answer from DEC later, but as far as I know, the answer is that this is a possibility. I mean, I've seen it done on other sites, not for the whole site, but for areas where there's specifically high levels of contamination. But I doubt that that will be decided for some time till the site assessment is complete. Spent fuel storage is another area of community concern. As we know, there really is no plan to take the fuel off-site. What we have to do is store it on the site, and it could be stored on the site really for the foreseeable future. So it does behoove us to store it as safely as possible. And at the moment, there's some debate about that. Community members have expressed concerns about both the safety of the casks and the vulnerability to terrorism. For those of you that have been on the river, you know that you can actually get direct line of sight onto the casks from the river. That is a concern that I have. And I'm not sure about whether you can get direct line of sight from other vantages. But I think I have talked with community members about the idea of trying to cut off direct line of sight from public areas so that we improve safety on the site. Now, no doubt we'll be talking about that more in later meetings. The other side of the casks is the whole question of thickness versus thinness, and how long they will last. As far as I understand on this, there's a robust debate on thickness versus thinness. Perhaps we shouldn't go into that, but the bottom line is that the casks that Holtec are using, which are characterized as the thin casks, are licensed by the NRC, and so unless they decide for some reason not to use those, they're able to use those. The other side of the coin, which I think is more perhaps is unaddressed to date, at least, is what about aging? What I've heard from NRC is that these casks there's no aging management required for the first 20 years because they're sure that they won't corrode or crack or whatever for the first 20 years. That is debatable. I know there are experts out there who claim that that's not true. I question whether they can really model that very effectively. But I think the more important thing for me is that at the end of the 20 years, they have told me that they don't know how they're going to do aging management. I don't know if that's correct or not, but I'd certainly be very interested to hear that, and I think other community members would be too. And then the final issue that I have on my list, and I have to say that I've tried to poll a few community members, but if I didn't get to your issue, please raise it later, because we'd be more than happy to add more issues to the list. So the other issue I have on my list is the disposal of the spent fuel pool water. This isn't something that will be coming up for a couple of years, but I've no doubt it is something that we'll be having a robust debate over. And so, what we've tried to do, or what I've suggested and what Tom's been responsive to, is the idea that let's try to work through the most urgent concerns first. And then when we have the most urgent concerns, which are immediate substantive safety issues, under control, or at least we feel like we've addressed them as best we can, then we can move on to other issues. So a couple of these things do fall into the on the agenda but not needing to be dealt with right away category. So rest assured that we have plenty of things to raise and discuss at this meeting, and we will continue to do so. Dave, do you want to add anything to all of that?
Yeah, I just want to add on to your comments about the upcoming handling of spent fuel pool water. When that issue was raised, I did do some research into how other plants have dealt with that issue. And I even looked at Indian Point for the annual releases of radioactive water to the Hudson River between 2005 and 2019. There was an average of over 3 million gallons per year during that period, but the dose to the public from those releases was less than 0.04% of the federal limit. I also heard about and did some research into Vermont Yankee nuclear plant, which transported over 2 million gallons of radioactively contaminated water to Idaho, where it was buried. And I looked at how the NRC looked at that, evaluated that, and ultimately authorized that to happen. And finally, I looked again at 3 Mile and how they dealt with over 1 million gallons of accident-generated water following its 1979 accident. The community got an injunction that did not allow them to discharge it to the Susquehanna River. So what they did was they processed the water to remove as much radiation as possible and then evaporated it to the atmosphere. So anyway, I just trying to better understand the context about how future decisions will be made. So hopefully to inform those decisions based on what we learned, lessons good and bad from the past.
Thanks, Dave and Richard, and we'll hear more from Rich Baroni later on in the agenda regarding the spent fuel pool. We heard that from some community members directly, and I wanted to make sure that he covered it in his presentation to trigger a DOB discussion of that issue, and I'm sure we'll have more discussions at future meetings as well. But this is really helpful. The engagement that you all have with the community, as well as the elected officials on our DOB, and that we have ourselves, we value a lot. And that informed the agenda tonight, and it will inform agendas at future meetings.
Tom, can I just
sorry,
add? Can I just add
yeah.
one thing? Sorry, one community member asked me about the Columbia study and were we participating in the Columbia study? And
Yeah,
I just
we're
want to
gonna have an
confirm that
update.
we have participated in that study, right?
We are, and there's an update from Joe Hochreiter coming up. But I want to recognize a few additional folks who signed in after we got started or who I missed initially. I apologize. County Executive Latimer, welcome. Sandy Galiff, Assemblymember Galiff, thank you very much for being on. And Lou Picani. Lou, and Lou and I spoke just before the meeting tonight and wanted to, as part of our task force business, which I'm sorry I already covered, but I want to come back to task force business. Lou had some issues that he wanted to get on the table. So I'd like to turn to him now, unless Richard and Dave, do you have anything further on community engagement? Or is it okay for me to turn back to task force business for a moment?
I think we're good. I
I'm
mean,
okay.
need to say, community members had a lot of more detailed explanation than we could present here, but I assume we'll deal with that when we actually deal with the topics that raised.
Yeah, we do have the topics on tonight's agenda. I want to, at the end, flag some issues for discussion that we can prepare to present next time in May. And I would also, continue to welcome discussions, informal or otherwise, between meetings with members of the community who are so engaged. So Lou, are you on, and is your mic working? Do you want to give us an update on some of the labor relations issues you've been working on?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you fine.
Okay. First of all, I want to wish everybody a happy St. Patrick's Day today. And I want to start off actually by thanking Governor Hochul and his task force for the grant that we secured for the simulator. And it actually was delivered last week. So we're in the process of setting it up and start training some members that were community people that were put out of work due to the closure. I have two letters I want to read, and I'm going to read them real fast for you because I know time is short tonight. One is from myself, addressed to the task force. It says, "Dear board members, I write in connection with my position as president of Teamsters Local 456 and as a member of the task force. In 2019, I was asked by Entergy and Holtec to offer my support for the sale of Indian Point from Entergy to Holtec for purposes of decommissioning the Indian Point Energy Center site. On May 6, 2020, I submitted a letter in support to Secretary Phillips indicating that Holtec has publicly stated both it will honor all existing collective bargaining agreements and represented a willingness to work with local labor unions to provide the necessary skills to safely execute and complete decommissioning. And I'll attach that when I submit this form. While Local 456 offered a willingness to assist with the transfer and its initial support for Holtec, I cannot say that Local 456 has been extended the same courtesy. From both a construction and security standpoint, Holtec has been evasive and undermining of organized labor. Despite representation to the contrary, Holtec has excluded Local 456 from construction work, and its members have performed for decades. The Building and Trades Council of Westchester and Putnam are going to submit a letter I'm going to read right after mine. This issue directly impacts the Teamsters, whose members have been involved in performing work at IPEC for decades. Now, Holtec is excluding Teamsters from performing construction work at the site for all decommissioning work. This does not create harmony with the local trades. Moreover, while the Teamsters were told they would be included in a successor agreement covering this work, Holtec has reneged. In addition, Local 456 has long represented nuclear security officers at Indian Point. Since taking over, Local 456 has filed numerous grievances concerning Holtec's breaching the collective bargaining agreement, as well as retaliating against members for engaging in protected concerted activities. In short, Local 456 optimistic views of a relationship with Holtec have been shattered. Rather than operating as a responsible corporate citizen offering benefits for stakeholders, Holtec has operated unilaterally and without regard to its initial promise to the state and community. We appreciate everyone's consideration of these important issues and look forward to further discussions." I now want to read a letter that's going to be addressed to Honorable Kathy Hochul, Governor of the State of New York, as well as Kelly Trice, President of Holtec. I'm reading this on behalf of President Edward Doyle, President of the Building Trades Council of Westchester Putnam County. Dear Mr. Trice, I write on behalf of the Building and Trades Council of Westchester Putnam County in connection with Holtec Decommissioning International, LLC Holtec, ongoing work at the Indian Point Center site, IPAC. I am concerned by the statute of the decommissioning work at IPAC and the exclusion of many of our affiliates from performing the crafts work at IPAC. In Holtec's represented to the state of New York, you advised that the work would be performed by union labor and in harmony with local trades, as has historically been done at IPAC. Based on these representations, the building trades and many of its affiliates publicly supported Holtec in the license transfer process and issued letters of support. Holtec currently shows that the company is no longer interested in seeking harmony with the building trades. Despite your representation to the state, Holtec is operating with only certain building trades, disregarding well-established craft lines that have been respected for decades at the site. The building trades is aware that the Teamsters, insulators, asbestos workers, plumbers and pipe fitters, and sheet metal workers were some of the crafts excluded. This is not the way our organization works, regardless of whatever national labor agreement you claim is in effect. It also is suspicious that Holtec negotiated a second national labor agreement, superseding the prior agreement and adding in new trades while Holtec was on notice of the historical craft lines at IPAC. No such notice of the second agreement was provided to the building trades or any of its affiliates. The building trades implores Holtec to respect this historical craft jurisdiction at the site. The Building and Construction Trades Council of Westchester Putnam Counties has numerous signatory contractors at ready and employ the local workforce who are highly trained to compete at the work site in a safe and effective manner. Our affiliates have worked at the site for decades, and we seek to continue to perform the work as we always have. We appreciate your consideration of these important issues and look forward to further discussions. In addition to Mr. Doyle's signature, he also draws attention to all the other building trades affiliates that co-signed this letter. I will forward it over to you. Also, it's CC to County Executive Latimer, Senator Harcum, Assemblywoman Galiff, Kathy Borger, the chair, and Colin Smith from the county. So this will be being forwarded to for you tomorrow. I apologize I couldn't get out to you earlier, but as you see, I had a little difficulty with my computer skills.
Yes, Lou. Look, I appreciate it, and I want to say that, you know, on behalf of the task force, it was certainly our hope and desire to see that the local trades and your members and all the employees that were already at Indian Point would be given the opportunity to continue during decommissioning to the maximum extent possible. We've discussed the local concerns a few times at previous meetings. We have facilitated some discussions, you know, between you guys and Holtec, but clearly more communication is warranted. And I think if it's all right with you, I'd like to try to follow up after this meeting early next week, even to coordinate and facilitate further discussions between you all and Holtec. I'd like to include our Department of Labor in that as well. Is that all right, Lou?
I think that's a great idea that we all start, you know, communicate with them to let them know that this is not what everybody signed up for. And actually, there's no trust there anymore. And I would appreciate all the help, Tom. I really do. Thank you. And
Sorry, go ahead, Lou.
the trust that we trust you. I just want to make that clear. That it was the way Holtec presented themselves and guaranteed that we would be at the table the next go around and entered in a second agreement without having anybody involved.
Look, if there's one thing that the task force and the Decommissioning Oversight Board can do, it is to facilitate and improve communications. And we'll be happy to play that role. And I hope it will be successful.
Thank you.
We could now turn to the pipeline safety portion of the discussion. This has, and I'm sure will remain, a very high priority for the Decommissioning Oversight Board. The members of the community have expressed a lot of questions and concerns about the co-location of the pipeline with Indian Point for many years now. I think through those discussions, we've helped to improve the safety of the situation. But I will acknowledge that we're always looking for further opportunities to improve. That means more opportunities for communication and improved protocols among Holtec and Enbridge. It means more work between the state and the federal oversight agencies, and importantly, strong communications from all of those parties to the public at large. So with that, I'd like to start the discussion tonight by asking the chief of our pipeline safety and reliability section of the department to give a very brief update on agency actions. And then we'd like to turn it over to Rick Kuprowitz, who is president of Equifax, and I introduced earlier in the meeting, someone who has worked with local governments on pipeline safety issues. We have spoken numerous times, and we greatly value his expertise and look forward to hearing from him. And then following Rick's presentation, I've asked Rich Baroni from Holtec to talk about recent activities from Holtec's perspective. And then I'd like to open it up to the DOB for a discussion with all three panelists. So with that, let me turn it to Kevin Speicher, our Chief of Pipeline Safety and Reliability. And the next slide, please.
Hi, thanks, Tom. Hi, I'm Kevin Speicher. As Tom said, I'm the Chief of Pipeline Safety at the department. I just want to go through a couple bullets. I don't want to take too much time so that Rick could start. So on December 16th, comments on the decommissioning plan for fire protection. So New York State agencies reviewed Holtec's Indian Point Fire Protection Program in December of 21. Following the review, the New York State reinforces that safe decommissioning of Indian Point depends on the safe operation of the natural gas pipelines intersecting the site, and vice versa. New York State also requested further information from Holtec on risk assessment and mitigation plans for gas pipeline incidents on site. DPS February 25th, 22 letter to Holtec in regards to referencing the heavy load pipeline crossings, weight limits, and protocols. New York State joint agreement with Holtec required Holtec to notify Enbridge and the Department of Public Service 5 days in advance of any heavy load crossings over the pipeline. On February 25th of this year, the department sent a letter to Holtec notifying them of the load limits of the pipelines calculated by Enbridge. Holtec has placed a steel air bridge over the pipeline crossing at Indian Point site to alleviate loads over the pipeline. Enbridge has analyzed the steel air bridge and has no concerns for typical daily loads. In the event that there will be crossings of greater than the capacity of the steel air bridge, Holtec will notify Enbridge and DPS. For the future, Enbridge is designing a permanent concrete structure for long-term duration of the site. On March 15th, 22 quarterly meeting with Holtec and Enbridge, and we had a call between Holtec, Enbridge, and DPS where we discussed the status of Enbridge's upcoming integrity work at the Indian Point site. That's to be detailed later. The status of the upcoming drills and training for emergency responders to the Indian Point Energy Center, and discussed Enbridge's analysis of the steel air bridge and notification protocols for heavy load crossings. Pipeline integrity work. So there is some work expected this year. This work was previously noted in the June 21 Decommissioning Oversight Board meeting. It was originally scheduled to take place in 21, but was moved to 22. In April of 22, Enbridge will begin work on the east side of the Hudson within the Indian Point side to tie its 26-inch pipeline to the 24-inch pipeline. This is to accommodate pipeline integrity work. Both pipelines will be depressurized while this work is going on. And the DPS staff will be there. We will be performing frequent, regular, and unannounced inspections. We typically do all of our inspections unannounced. We want to see people in how they normally perform their work. So those will be surprise visits. Holtec participate. So Enbridge is coordinating a training drill and exercise for first responders nearby to IPEC, Peekskill, Montrose, Verplank, and Buchanan fire departments. This drill is expected to take place in May or June of 22. The Indian Point Fire Brigade will be participating in the drill. The scenario has not yet been announced. And that is, we would want that to be as unannounced as possible. So we want to see, how people respond in real life situations. So that's it, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. The emergency drill that you're referencing is required under the federal regulations, correct?
They are required to interface with the local fire departments, correct? Yes.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Rick Kuprowicz. Next slide, please. I've already introduced Rick, president of Vacufax, well-respected expert, and really grateful, Rick, for you agreeing to speak with us tonight. I'll turn it over to you. Rick, you might be on mute.
Oh,
There you are.
oh, is it working now?
It is. We hear you.
I love technology.
Okay. Welcome.
Sometimes it's the operator. Keep that point in mind. Anyway, brief history. I've been involved in the Indian Point site with the various pipelines from 2014 to 2020. A lot of people may be aware, the Indian Point with the transmission pipelines is rather unique in that you have two transmission pipelines to the north of the facility and one transmission pipeline to the south. They're all fairly high pressure transmission and large diameter pipelines. The involvement here ended up with an NRC Inspector General investigation of various statements made. In early 2020, they came out with a very scathing report that required an immediate response from NRC. And bottom line is we're moving forward. Next slide, please. Let me just take a second to get people to understand. You don't have to hit a transmission pipeline to cause it to rupture. And everybody's objective, and I think we all agree to this, but agreeing and getting there are two different animals. On the right of way, you can have abnormal surface loading that can cause the pipeline to either crack or stress. It doesn't necessarily fail at that time. It may fail at a later date. Off the pipeline right away, there can be unusual decommissioning activities that could put a stress on the buried pipelines, even though that activity is off the pipeline right away. And so it's important that Holtec and Enbridge kind of communicate what the various activities are and be sure that Enbridge understands what's going on because it's their pipelines. Right? They're going to come after Holtec if it ruptures, but guess what? It's not going to help anybody if we rupture. So it's important that Holtec keep Enbridge in the loop at the proper level. Enbridge understands that we are responsible for the pipelines, and if you're doing activity, we need to evaluate it because it's our pipeline. That's a federal requirement, and you can argue about it in court, but that's the way it is. The good news is the engineering science on these various pipeline threats, whether they be surface loading crossing the pipeline or unusual activity off the pipeline right away. And an extreme would probably be like blasting. I don't even know if that's in this. I don't know what the plans are in detail. But, even if there were blasting, there's ways to evaluate. That science for pipelines has been well established. And the good news is Enbridge gets this. All right. They know. So as a pipeline operator, you need to keep Enbridge in the loop and let them evaluate what's going on. All right. So the good news is the science is well established. Enbridge, as a gas transmission operator, understands this. Somewhere in their organization, they'll have people who can deal with this. It's getting those people involved that's important. Next slide, please. So the key problem here on this particular decommissioning effort is Holtec's managing the decommissioning effort. They've got an incentive to do certain things. Enbridge is managing the pipelines. They have a maximum incentive to ensure the pipelines don't rupture. So the key objectives are the same, but the two parties may or may not be communicating in a manner that makes the decision makers within the pipeline company understand or accept. So it's important that the communications between Holtec and Enbridge have at least single point contacts designated within each company. That any of those contacts are done in written, like emails or letters, in advance notice that allows Enbridge to evaluate that properly. Don't accept verbal. And there needs to be in play some way that whatever's going on in the field is being verified, that if Enbridge and Holtec have agreed to do certain things, some person in the field isn't deciding to do it differently. All right? Sounds a simple concept, but when you've got a lot of, this is a complex project. So I understand the apprehension by some in the public. That's completely understandable. What's important to avoid is, especially in the Holtec decommissioning efforts, is overconfidence and what I'll call stupidity. All the risk assessments in the world are going to go out the window if you've got a guy who takes upon himself in the field to do something that he hasn't gotten approval to do. It's important that everybody understand to respect the pipelines. I'm not trying to instill fear here, but you need to understand a pipeline rupture of any one of these pipelines is going to kill a lot of people and do a lot of damage. And I have no desire to see first responders be sacrificed. All right? So you need to understand the roles and responsibilities of first responders. But if you really think first responders can take control of a pipeline rupture, that's doing injustice to first responders. The best thing is to have the pipeline operator in this loop, approving the decisions, verifying that they're actually occurring in the field, that they're scientifically evaluated, they understand it, and they say yes, and then somebody doesn't run amok. I believe the parties can get there because the science is well established. It's not new, it's not rocket science, but the key player here is Enbridge, whether they like it or not. But I believe you can get there. And I'm encouraged by what I see going on here, and you need to communicate some of that to the public, and that's fair. Anyway, that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Rick, and really appreciate this presentation, this information, and I want to get to a discussion, but before we get there, I want to give Rich Baroni a few minutes to go over from Holtec's operations, their perspectives, including some summaries of communications and protocols that I believe are consistent with what you just laid out.
Good.
So I'm going to turn it over to Rich now.
Hey, so good evening, everybody. I appreciate the ability or the time here to provide the status of our decommissioning efforts, as well as addressing questions by both the state representatives and our community leaders. So let's talk about the gas line for a minute. Can you next slide, please? I'll tell you, we're lockstep with what Mr. Kupowicz just said. We come from a culture where we've generated 6,000 megawatts thermal on a daily basis. We know when we respect energy, right? And we do respect it highly. And we have taken mitigating actions to limit the potential of an event here at Indian Point. So regarding the 26 and 30-inch lines, we've installed stainless steel plates in an above-ground air bridge, and we could show you pictures at the end. But that was based on the past transport of one of our heaviest loads on the roadway in question. So years ago, main transformer spares, we transported, we bridged these lines, and it worked out well then. And we reinstated that same design at the present time. Enbridge has confirmed that this configuration is satisfactory. And the current design is good for 5 times the weight of any of our heaviest loads without impacting the gas lines. And upon our request, we've asked Enbridge to come to the field and check the field installation of the steel plates in the bridge configuration, and they're satisfactory with the results. The joint proposal also requires Holtec to inform Enbridge 5 days prior to crossing the pipelines with heavy loads. But as a daily routine, there is commercial traffic crossing the air bridge configuration. So with the present configuration approved by Enbridge, the 5-day notification period has been met. And we're going to formalize that between the state and Holtec with the designated points of contacts, memorializing this in writing. And if the transportation of any vehicle exceeds our current heaviest loads, then we will contact Enbridge in accordance with the 5-day prior requirement that's listed in the joint proposal. Since this road's going to be used throughout the decommissioning process and potentially beyond, Enbridge has informed us that they are looking at a potential subsurface configuration change to protect the line, basically a subsurface air bridge technique. We'll work with them as much as we can. I have civil engineers that are anxious to work with them, and so more to follow there. But you know, there is always a concern about how we transport spent fuel, and I can assure you that the spent fuel transport from either one of our spent fuel pool buildings does not cross any of the gas lines from the spent fuel pool buildings to the asphyxia pad. Our engineering staff here communicates on an as-needed basis with engineering staff engineers, and the same holds true for management staff at my level. So we have established committed points of contact, and those are in writing. And then where we can avoid crossing the pipeline, we do so in order to provide us with some margin. So we are working on the asphyxia pad north of the pipeline. We can, and it requires a lot of cement. So what we've used is our north entry gate to allow the cement trucks to enter the site for the asphyxia pad work. Right, so we'll continue to look at avenues just to provide us some margin. There are quarterly scheduled meetings with Enbridge, New York State representatives, and Holtec, where we do discuss activities. And if there's any issues or concerns, they are addressed there as well. And the most recent meeting was this past Tuesday on the 15th. Next slide. Building demolition activities within the protected area occur north of the pipelines. Additional demolition activities will take place further south as well. In all cases, right, we will contact Enbridge 5 days in advance as to when these activities are to occur. In addition, we are required to get a building permit from the village of Buchanan. Now, the joint proposal also requires us to have the control room operators have a direct line access to Enbridge, and this is in place in each of the control rooms. As previously discussed, the fire protection plan for IPEC was developed and submitted to the New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services. We submitted that plan in September. Request for additional information was received in December of 21, and then we responded back in February of this year. We do have our procedures that instruct the control room operators to contact the Vermont Fire Department in case of a fire, along with contacting Enbridge. And Verplank will respond and assume command and control or incident command. And then the function, I guess I want to make this clear. The function of our fire brigade and our fire protection systems is to protect the site facilities and the systems required to ensure cooling functions are maintained. Our biggest issue here is to maintain spent fuel pool cooling, right? And we need the fire brigade to ensure that. Enbridge, like we said before, is committed to provide training to the 4 local fire departments and the fire brigade on site. That's going to happen in the May-June timeframe. If we can go to the next slide, we'll show you the air bridge there. So have a series of steel plates. The 1-inch steel plates they don't go across, but they run parallel to the pipelines themselves. We verified pipeline location through ground penetrating radar. And then across that, we put a 2-inch steel plate, which is tack welded in place. And that's for both the 26-inch line and the 30-inch line. So our commercial loads, our heavy loads will go across that. And in the meantime, all general traffic will go to a parallel path on the left-hand side. So, I mean, if I listen to what Mr. Kropowicz said, I think we're lock stop in with him in as far as protecting the gas line and most importantly, respecting it. We're used to high energy systems here on site. We understand the concept of high energy, and we're taking all those precautions just to ensure that there's no issues. That's all I have, Tom.
Thank you, Rich. I want to turn it over in a second to any DOB member that has a question. But I'll take the liberty of asking the first one to Rick Kuprowicz based on what you just heard from Rich Baroni and what you heard earlier from our Chief of Gas Safety. How we doing?
I think you guys are trying to get there, and that's a positive. So I don't want to over embellish it. I've used air bridges myself in operating pipelines. You just got to be sure that you've done the engineering analysis. And if you've got Enbridge in that loop, Enbridge will be able to do that. They've got people who get this. So it sounds like you're on the right track. I would just caution you, well, you're meeting formally, every so many months. You want a communication link where if something's going wrong day to day, somebody picks up the phone and gets the other side and gets their attention so that you can quickly resolve that. So that someone in the field isn't inadvertently, he's in a rush, and so he cuts corners and gets one. Holtec doesn't want to be in that situation, nor does Enbridge. So you need to kind of have a way to, not only formally, but informally, that's established. And that's what I get back to that one-on-one. So I think you're moving forward, and you need to communicate this to the public in certain ways. And there'll be part of the public who won't accept all this. And all you can do is try to do the best you can. All right. So far, it looks encouraging.
Thank you for that. I'll point out, I mentioned earlier that we're going to have a resident inspector who will be on site. That will be another check on this. There are protocols that are put in place here that we have helped to facilitate. There's more work to be done to get it formalized and in writing. But we're encouraged as well as the regulator that Enbridge has been responsive to recent information requests. We kind of go through the tick list, Rick, that you provided that went through all the key ingredients of the risk assessment to know exactly where the pipeline is, to understand the max load potential on the pipe. And we were able to obtain all of that from Enbridge, pass it through to Holtec, and continue to facilitate these discussions. So I
think some of the public doesn't see all the details that you, I, and other players have interacted, and so they're naturally going to be suspicious, and they should be. I mean, until you can get that across to them. Again, you may not eliminate all of them, but the vast majority, because all they think about is pipeline ruptures, bad thing, and that's true. So I think we're on the same wavelength there, and I want to be supportive of that effort.
I want to turn it over to other DOB members if there are any questions.
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Yep, Richard.
Both for both Mr. Rowley, Mr. Kuprowicz, which is, I heard that Mr. Kuprowicz, I think that activities outside the right of way could lead to stress and ultimately fractures and leaks. But I don't think I heard anything from Mr. Baroni about control of activities outside the right of way. Did I miss something?
I'll just respond to that. All of our work activities on site are controlled through the work control process. That process hasn't changed since the beginning of operation at Indian Point. So any work that would be near the pipeline, we'd have a planner would plan it. It would go through its risk assess process, and then we'd make the necessary communications if possible. But right now, there's absolutely no work being done in the vicinity of the pipelines themselves. Absolutely none. But we have work processes in place that would control that.
And I'd add that there are certain off the right of way activities that might be a problem, but they're kind of unusual. Like if you're doing major blasting, I don't think you're doing that, but I don't know that. But that
No.
would be one threat that you want to be sure that's not occurring or that Enbridge gets involved in. So I don't want to leave the impression that all activities off the right of way are a threat. That's not true. That's not fair to Holtec, and it's not fair to Enbridge. But they are specialized, and so common sense would tell you if you're doing blasting anywhere near the right of way, you want to be talking to people.
Absolutely. And any blasting we would do would have to be approved by a permit from the village. So we wouldn't even attempt that at this point.
Well, and furthermore, our JP requires 5 days notice of Enbridge of any activities that are of that kind of nature that would be outside of the right of way. And through our written protocols that we are still formalizing, we would expect the requirement on Enbridge to respond affirmatively that they understand the activity and understand the pipe, understand the risk of the pipeline and sign off on it. Or if they believe that that activity presents a risk to the pipeline that is not mitigated, that further discussions would obviously be required until everybody is comfortable that it can be done safely.
Absolutely.
Sandy Galiff?
Yes, Sandy.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, I want to say to Rich Baroni that the local 456 is absolutely unacceptable. You have to deal with that right away and report back to us. The other is Rich Kuperwitz talked about the written notices as opposed to verbal. And I don't know whether I've heard anything between, what was going on with written notices from, Holtec to Enbridge, or have they just all been verbal? So that's one. Another question is, and this really came from the community, should the pipeline sites be identified some way? I know there's clearing, but should they be identified? Have they been identified in other places where there are pipelines? And maybe they're identified now. I just didn't really see that. And the other thing, I just want you to know that I went to a pharmacist today. People are asking for potassium iodide. So, there's a lot of concern out there, and the concern may be Russia and cyber attacks and everything else that's going on. And maybe you can explain what happened with the Colonial Pipeline cyber attack and, give us some information on that. So I guess I have 3 questions.
Well, I'll answer the second one. There is written communication between Holtec and Enbridge with regards to engineering activities that are going on. Plus, we've established in writing who the points of contacts are between each of the companies. I feel like
totally you've everything has been written. So if somebody asked you for any information, you would have it all in writing.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
And Sandy, for avoidance of doubt, from the regulator's standpoint on the JP, we have in writing formally requested that, again, for avoidance of doubt, that all the communications related to the 5-day notice requirements under our joint proposal be in writing to those designated points of contact.
Okay, thank you.
As far as demarcation of the gas lines throughout the site, I think we've shown that to the tour groups how the 2 gas lines progress through the site. In fact, we even showed where the 42-inch line is at the southern tip of the property. So I think we have adequate designation of the pipelines that go through the site. If you're talking about outside the site proper, I would have to turn that over to Enbridge. As far as the cyber attack, I'm sorry, I don't I don't know the answer to that question.
Maybe, Rich, do you know about that?
You're in an area I can't really comment about, but it's a fair question. I'm not trying to be secretive. I'm trying to be fair to all parties.
Is there
I'm
a
not
cost
worried
to
about
it?
cyber attack. I'm not trying to be dismissive. It's not the risk of concern regarding this site. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It just says that there are other checks and balances. You shouldn't be relying on computers to be your last line of protection. Does that make sense? Especially a gas transmission pipeline. Now, as soon as I say that, guess what?
Thanks.
I just want to also, I was corrected by my colleague Bridget Freimeyer that for any kind of heavy duty activity like dredging or blasting or other activities, the DPS requires 10 days, not 5 days notice. So thank you, Bridget, for that correction. I want to turn it over to Senator Harcum. He had his hand up as well.
Thank you, Tom. A number of us on the DOB work with our federal partners to get the Federal Oversight Agency of the pipeline to agree to an independent safety review of the pipeline. Can somebody comment on what the timing of that is and when we expect that report back?
I don't think anyone on this call knows exactly what their timing is for completion. However, I will say that PHMSA has indicated to us that they're at a stage of sort of peer review. And so that indicates and suggests that they're making progress, and hopefully it will be in the near future.
Can somebody reach out to them and see if we can get an ETA on that?
Yes.
Thank you.
This is Catherine Borgia. Could I just ask a follow-up question about what happened with working with the local unions? I don't really understand why those promises weren't kept, especially considering how our local workers know the plant the best.
I think the best way for me to answer that is for our president, Kelly Trice, to address it with Mr. Picani. But I will tell you one thing. There are two sides to every story. I want to leave it at that for now.
I agree with two sides to every story, and any time that he wants to discuss it with yourself, both sides could talk in front of this board or however you want to speak about it.
Absolutely.
I may as well note here that I did get pinged from a few DOB members following Lou's comments, Senator Harcum, Assemblywoman Galiff, and also from a member of the audience, Jerry Shapiro, wanting to do follow-up discussions on that, Rich and Lou. So as I said, when Lou read the letters into the record, I think that it probably merits a separate meeting. And we would be happy to facilitate that and have discussions with all the parties interested.
Understood.
Dave Lockbaum, you have your hand up on a pipeline question?
I have a question for Rick Kuprowitz. The community has raised concerns about the nearby pipelines operating during decommissioning. What conditions or situation, in your opinion, would warrant shutdown of a pipeline as a precautionary measure?
At this stage of the game, I don't think there's any condition that merits the shutdown of the pipelines. You may want to lower the pressure a little bit. In my almost 50 years of pipeline involvement, including operations and maintenance, I've been guided by one important principle. Don't make a decision based on the illusion of a safety. I want to be careful. It's easy for the public to think, well, if I don't have pressure on this, therefore the line's not going to fail and it's okay. Well, that's true while you don't have pressure on it. The problem is that doesn't necessarily protect the pipeline if it gets damaged while it's not on pressure. And then when you put it back into operation and start raising the pressure, it may choose to fail, or it could wait a while to do that. So I'd rather focus in on doing the activities that are preventive in their nature, that do not risk the pipeline, rather than go to the leap of saying, take the pressure off. Now, there will be situations where they may have to do that. And then you mentioned about they might want to do that for a tie-in. But I would suggest put your emphasis on prevention and doing the right things, getting the right people into the science and accepting that. And it won't really matter what pressure you're operating at, because the pipeline is still safe.
If I understand you right, then you're saying shutting down a pipe may just change the timing of the rupture, not prevent the rupture.
You're putting it in English. Thank you. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're delaying it, and it may set you up for a really big failure.
Thank you.
I have a question maybe for both Riches. I know, Rich Baroni, you're still several years away from getting to the point of dismantling the domes, but those are, the large structures that are on the Indian Point site that are probably causing some of the greatest concerns in the community. Maybe you can share just generally how far away they are from the pipeline right away to inform my question for Mr. Kuprowicz, which would be, the heavy concrete structure of these domes, when those are being dismantled, if there were some kind of accident during the dismantling that caused some kind of collapse of a facility of that kind of magnitude, is that the kind of event that would create some kind of force from the distance to the right of way that Rich will explain, that you think should be of concern? And obviously, I think, that's going to probably speak to the importance of a safe dismantling. But so first question to Baroni, how far away? Next question to Mr. Kuprowicz, what do we have to be concerned of when it comes to the dismantling of these large structures?
All right, so currently we're looking at 10 to 11 years from now when we start taking down the containment buildings themselves. What we've had success with, albeit in a smaller scale, is diamond wire cutting on the cement blocks. And then from the diamond wire cutting, we generate a block, and then the block is removed by crane. So our thoughts are right now is that we can use that engineered methodology to take the domes down. Again, it's 10 to 11 years from now. There's a lot more planning that has to be done. But right now, that's what it looks like. In addition, I'll have to verify this, but I think the Unit 3 dome is about 600 feet from the 26-inch line, which is currently depressurized 50 pounds. And it'll remain depressurized at 50 pounds as a backup spare, from what I understand, to the 42-inch line. In addition, Enbridge does have a preventive maintenance program that they talked to me about, where they'll put a device through the pipe just to verify pipe thickness, insulation breakdowns. So they do have a maintenance program that verifies the integrity of the pipe itself.
So, Mr. Kuprowicz?
Well, I'd say, yeah, I think one of the unusual activities would be like if you were taking apart a large structure and it fell and it, hit the ground, that generates forces similar to like a dynamite explosion. But distance is the factor there. And I would say, if you're going to cut them up and lift them up, that's fine. But if I was thinking you might have like a repeated impact force busting them up might be an option. That would be one of those unusual activities where you're hitting the ground with a lot of force, but you let Enbridge say, this is what I'm doing. And they'll say, well, you're this many feet away. It's this type of soil. This is the force you're using. and our calculations are well established, they're science, they'll say, 600 feet is not going to be a problem. But that's what Enbridge needs to decide and know about. So I think when you get to that activity, it's good if you're just going to cut it up and lift them out. That's a good thing. But if you do have to have the option of breaking them up with force, you can still do that. I don't want to create this uncertainty or panic in people that's a major risk of concern. It's just a risk that's unusual that you want to be sure that it's evaluated. And the science that individuals use will say, yeah, we get this and it's not a problem. All right. Or it is a problem and do it differently. But those are unusual in their nature. Like you say, it's 10 or 11 years away. Well, the downside with that is some people will forget. So, but I think you can manage those, and it's a well-established science. All right.
I don't think the board will allow us to forget.
No.
No, not you guys, but you got to be sure that contact at Enbridge is the right person.
Well, all throughout, we're going to be meeting and we are in a unique position at the Department of Public Service because we have a little bit of that jurisdiction as the federal delegate oversight entity that we can make sure that Enbridge stays at the table. They've been at the table, but we will make sure that they stay at the table, continue providing timely answers to Holtec's questions, reviewing the notifications and responding. So we take that seriously. I want to, we're running on time here, but I want to emphasize something that Kevin Speicher, our chief, said, because last time there was some pipeline integrity work in the community. It caught a lot of people by surprise. And Mayor Knickerbocker, if you're on, I'm sure Enbridge has been in touch with the village regarding the work that they plan to do in the coming weeks. But I want to emphasize that work will be happening. So to the extent that it's visible to any members of the community, that they know that's on depressurized line and it's pipeline integrity work similar to what they did in the fall. But Mayor Knickerbocker, do you have anything else to report on that front?
No, I just want to say that when Enbridge does do any upgrades or maintenance on their pipelines, they are in contact with the Village of Buchanan.
Great. Excellent. Well, Rick Kuprowicz, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for taking our calls along the way. I hope you'll remain available to both the state as well as community members who hold you in very high regard and appreciate very much the information that you provide to them and to us.
I think you're on the right track. Just keep it up and work on that communication and contact. And it's easy to lose the trust if you don't stay consistent and ethical. So be careful there. All right. And good luck to you guys. I'll let you go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I followed the slide presentations and unfortunately missed a slide that I wanted to do for Joe Hochreiter, wanting to give a quick update on the school monitoring working group. You don't have to go back, whoever's running the slideshow here, because I don't think Joe had any slides. But Joe Hochreiter, do you want to give an update on the school monitoring working group? And know that when I turn it back over to Rich Baroni as part of his presentation, he's going to touch on the work Columbia is doing as well, and is also going to be talking about dust control, which I know is on your mind for that part of the discussion. But if you want to just give a quick update on the meeting that the school working group had, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you to the task force for allowing us to have a specific school working group. We know that our community has raised many concerns and is very anxious about this process, as we all are, particularly with regards to one of our elementary schools being in close proximity. So it was a few months ago that one of our district residents, who is also a Columbia University professor, reached out to me and some of the members of our committee and proposed aligning the work of the task force with a graduate level class that he teaches at Columbia University. And the task is a capstone experience for the students in the master's program to work on site with Holtec and in the basically in the neighborhood to do some tests and collect some data. But basically, their ultimate goal is to help us as a task force, and particularly the district, identify potential uses for that $500,000 fund that the district was awarded to monitor decommissioning activity. So real quick, I'll just give you a breakdown of what they're doing. So students in this spring 2020 class, it's a Master's of Science in Sustainability Science. They're going to provide a strategic master plan to the community in the district to make sure that we have monitoring of environmental quality related to health outcomes at the Buchanan-Verplanck Elementary School, the school that is in close proximity to the site. The students working in the class are going to provide a risk assessment. They're going to conduct preliminary soil sampling, air and water sampling on the school grounds to create a baseline for us, and as well as a comparative analysis and assessment so that we can have some recommendations for equipment purchases, data analysis purchases, and different tools, equipment, and materials that we can use to make sure that our staff, our students, and our families feel safe. So I know that was it was well received when the school district received the $500,000. We still would like more, and we'll continue to advocate for more. But in terms of building a master plan to keep our school community safe and our staff and our students and parents comfortable, this is a really exciting endeavor. And I do have some follow-up, as Tom mentioned, but I'll wait for the other presentation. But this is very exciting work, and if you see some strangers on school property, they're working on behalf of the task force, and we're going to make some data-driven decisions with that $500,000, and I think it's important that we do that.
Thanks, Joe. I think the Columbia students' recommendations are going to be really helpful as we think about the best strategies here. And I want to thank Dave Lockbaum for providing a great deal of information to the students, and also thank Rich Baroni, because Holtec has been really engaged with the school, with the class, and providing a great deal of information from Holtec. And with that, I want to turn it over to Rich for the next part of the agenda here, which is a broad update of decommissioning activities. We wrote to Rich a few weeks ago, asked him to cover a number of topics, and I believe his presentation will be responsive to that request. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rich. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. So if we go to the next slide, really the next couple of, well, here's the agenda, right? We'll talk about our spent fuel storage activities. We'll give a high lift / David Crane update. We'll talk about vessel segmentation, and then the NRC inspections and activities right through from October right through today. You asked about the Oyster Creek NRC enforcement action. I could briefly talk about that. We'll talk about some building demolition activities. The state pollutant discharge elimination system, SPEEDIES, is actually the discharges to the river. We'll go through that. Go through the CDI, HDI transition, some community relations, and then the monitoring project at the BV school, like Joe just said. So next slide. 4 casks of spent fuel were loaded and transferred from the Unit 2 spent fuel pool to the independent spent fuel installation. So it's the SFSI pad. That happened in the fall of 21. We finished up in early November. The 4 casks resulted in a total of 24 that were required to be loaded and transferred to the SFSI pad through the end of 2021. And that was per the January 2017 agreement between New York State, Riverkeeper, and Entergy. So prior to the 24 casks, there are already 34 casks on the pad. So right now we have a total of 58 high storms on the pad itself. To store all the fuel from both pools, an additional 69 casks are required, 28 from Unit 2 and 41 from Unit 3. So I'll apologize now to the previous tour groups in the November, December timeframe. We've had to increase our cask count by 1 each from each fuel pool, just based on the heat load of the fuel that we're offloading. So we had to increase it by 1 from each spent fuel pool. So in total, from all three spent fuel pools will result in 127 casks to be stored on our asphyxie pads, and this number is increased by 2, like I just said. We will start our spent fuel pool offload campaign in August of this year, and I apologize for the typo here, but Unit 3 will start our offload in February of 23. And at the end of the day, right, by October of 2023, will be fuel on pad protected. And I can get to some detail on that, but this is considered one of our critical paths. Next slide. So here's a picture of our existing pad. What you see in the vehicle cask transporter, which is bottom left. That was the 4th cask that we loaded. That vehicle cask transporter brought it down to the Unit 2 spent fuel pool and has since been loaded. So right now, on our existing pad, there are 58 casks. If you could see the 5 smaller casks about 2 or 3 rows in, that's a Unit 1 fuel. Next slide. So currently, to support the casking of all fuel, we are doing fuel inspections. All right, we have to inspect 896 fuel assemblies at Unit 2 and an additional 1,280 assemblies at Unit 3. We should complete all of our inspections within the next 3 weeks. Then to accommodate the storage of all the casks, an additional asphyxie pad must be built. So the existing pad will hold 75 casks, and the new expansion pad will hold an additional 52. And then the final concrete pour for the pad is scheduled for this spring. The new pad construction requires a retaining wall on the north side of the installation. The forms and the rebar required are currently being worked on. We're going to pour that concrete next on the 22nd, which I think is next Wednesday. Next slide, please. So this just shows our operators extracting fuel from one of the fuel racks. We'll transport it to a space within the spent fuel pool where we have some space. And you could see on that picture on the right, if you go to the left-hand side, there's cameras and lights that do a visual inspection of the fuel. So we'll look, you can see the grid straps, you can see any imperfections in the fuel, right? And that's a requirement before we cask any fuel. Next slide. This is the asphyxie pad. So what you see on the right is what's called the mud mat. And actually, that would give in a seismic event. Right, that's about 3 feet of concrete there. On top of that pad will be additional rebar and additional 3 feet of concrete, which will bring it up to the same level as the existing pad. And then on the right-hand picture is the retaining wall I just talked about. That's needed for, well, it's for some safeguards equipment that needs to be installed. I can't go any further with that. But that pour will occur next week. Next slide. So that's it with regards to where we are with the fuel and where we are with the asphyxie pad. So I know there's a lot of interest in the davit crane. Let's to recap this for a minute there. For us to meet the 1023 fuel on pad protected time frame, we need this crane. It needs to be installed in the Unit 3 spent fuel pool building. The application for the installation of the crane was originally submitted by Entergy Nuclear by way of a license amendment request on March 24th of 2020. Series of strenuous reviews and requests for additional information by the NRC. There was 4 in total. It was a rigorous review cycle by the NRC, which Holtec answered all questions for the information needed. That resulted in the response to the LAR. The NRC did issue a safety evaluation report on February 25th of this year, and that's allowing the installation of the high lift crane. The construction is in progress. Holtec does have a facility in Pittsburgh, and our factory acceptance test is scheduled for May 16th. We've had discussions today, as a matter of fact, with the NRC. They want to observe some of the factory acceptance testing, as well as the testing on site. So they will be there with us as we do the installation and testing of the hot lift crane. Next slide. All right, the other critical path is really our vessel segmentation. To date, we have progressed with the removal of insulation, piping, and reactor support components that are not internal to the reactor coolant system or the reactor at either unit. So the insulation, if it was asbestos, we took it down in accordance with the state regulations. We've boxed that all and we've shipped it. The existing equipment hatches, they weren't big enough to facilitate the removal of larger pieces of equipment or the dimensions of waste transfer casks, and therefore they had to be enlarged. So this is where we used the water-cooled diamond embedded wire, and that was used to perform the cutting of the concrete, the rebar, and the steel liner. And if you came on any of the tours, we showed everybody what that looked like. So when you looked at the combination of the water-cooled system, in addition, we did maintain a negative pressure in the containment buildings, and that basically prevented any dust or silica to be free released to the atmosphere. We are preparing the reactor cavities to accommodate flooding, where segmentation work will occur on the reactor internals, and all it's going to be performed underwater. I know that was a question. A series of saw blades will be used to demo the internals and the reactors themselves. I think it's a 42-inch, a 60-inch, and a 72-inch saw blade will be used to do the segmentation work, and there's a picture that'll follow. We did some factory acceptance testing of the blades and their support structures. That's in progress, and to date we've had satisfactory results with that. We've actually cut coupons, what we call coupons or metal pieces, the same thickness of the vessels themselves. And then we have to send a group up for training, just so they can know how to operate the machine itself. So right now, cavity flood up and cutting are scheduled to start in late August or early September of this year for Unit 3. Unit 2 will follow in March of 2023. And then greater than Class C waste will be removed and stored by October 23. So that, again, that's the critical path right there. Once that is done, vessel segmentation efforts will continue after 2023 for approximately 10 months with the cavity drained and the containment buildings intact. So as you can see, this was the cut up of Unit 3, I believe. Doesn't make a difference, they're both the same. But the diamond wire cutting actually cut, I believe it was 31 blocks in total. It was able to cut through both the cement, the rebar, and the 3/4-inch steel liner that was internal to the containment building. Relatively no issues, other than it was cold and sometimes the water system had to be recirculated. And at the end of the day, when we cut out the equipment hatch, we wound up with a roll-up door that we'll use to secure the containment buildings. And that's the same right now for both units 2 and 3. That's what they look like. Next slide. On the left is typical work that we're doing inside the cavity to prepare it for flood up. We're just taking apart some of the lighting and some of the structure inside. And then on the left, you could see the typical saw blade that we'll be using. That was one of the test rigs they had up in Canada. That's where the system is being installed. I'm sorry, being developed and tested. So it's a pretty big saw blade. Next slide. So in parallel to all of that, we're preparing the containment building itself as part of the segmentation process. So on the left is a steam generator. The insulation has been stripped. The top pipe coming off is the steam pipe that used to feed the turbines, and the bottom pipe that bends into the generator, that was the feed water line. So we're taking apart all of these pipes and we're removing all of the insulation, and the picture on the right is the removed steam line that used to feed the turbine, and that's from 31 reactor coolant pump. 31 steam generator, I'm sorry. Next slide. This is just an animation of what it's going to look like. Both of those rigs or both of those structures will go into the cavity. We'll manipulate the internals of the reactor vessel itself through these gantry cranes, and we'll do the segmentation there. It's a pretty intense process. And right now we're on track to get it done. Like I said, by the dates that I showed before. But again, the critical date for us is to be pool on pad protected, get all the greater than Class C waste into the asphyxia area by October of 23. Next slide. I know, Tom, you asked about NRC inspections and recent activities. So we did submit an exemption request in accordance with 10 CFR 20 Appendix G. Low-level rad waste, our shipments go to Texas, right? So initially it was allowed to have a 20-day time period. We asked for an exemption to 45 days. It's basically an industry standard. We submitted that exemption request to the NRC in November of 21 and received approval this past February. We talked about the LAR, the license amendment request for the high lift crane. The SER, the safety evaluation report for the high lift, was received from the NRC February. The post-shutdown activities report, there were RAIs initiated by the NRC. We replied to those in February. No other RAIs to date. The PDEP is the post-decommissioning emergency plan. That LAR was submitted to the NRC in February, along with an exemption request for some of the emergency plan activities. We predict, or the NRC's schedule has the PDEP approved by January of 23. And then last but not least, we submitted an exemption request, or we are submitting an exemption request by early next week to allow us to cast damaged fuel that may contain a primary or secondary source. So we're working on that with the engineers in Camden, as well as our reg assurance people in both Camden and Indian Point. That's it on the reg assurance piece. So if I'm talking too fast, Tom, just let me know.
No, I appreciate you going fast. It is dense material, but and I want to get to the Q&A. So
okay.
So that's fine. You're going apace.
So I know there was questions on the NRC enforcement action at Oyster Creek, right? So on December 22nd, the NRC issued a confirmatory order resulting from an NRC Office of Investigation. So that investigation was opened March 13th, 2020, and it was concluded March 11th of 2021. The investigation was to determine if a member of the Oyster Creek Security Department deliberately failed to perform firearms maintenance activities and falsified records related to those activities. Based upon their review, the NRC determined that, based upon the evidence, the security armorer deliberately failed to perform certain required firearms maintenance activities for the calendar year 2019, that the armorer deliberately falsified records related to these activities, and that these falsified records were submitted to the NRC in response to an April 10th, 2020 information request. I believe this armorer also performed the same violation as a member of Exelon when Exelon owned Oyster Creek. The security implications from this investigation confirmatory order were basically violations of 10 CFR 50.5, deliberate misconduct, and 10 CFR 50.9, deliberately submitting false or incorrect or inaccurate information. So what did we do from a Holtec perspective? The employee involved in the incident was terminated unfavorably. Holtec implemented the position of a fleet security director. In fact, he was my security manager here at Indian Point. He's now been appointed as the security director for the entire fleet. That's to provide additional oversight to the security programs HDI activities. Our HDI president communicated via email the importance of integrity and the implications of falsifying records and providing false information, i.e., you will be terminated. And periodically send out also reminders on adherence to 10 CFR 50.5, and 10 CFR 50.9. The security department will provide specific training concerning integrity and compliance. I think one of the bigger things too was the Holtec Fleet Security implemented a peer review signature on weapons maintenance documents. So in other words, there's 2 signatures now versus the 1, and that removes single point vulnerability. And last but not least, our reg assurance folks in Oyster and through cooperation with the reg assurance folks in Camden, they're performing a root cause evaluation, and I'm sure additional corrective actions from that will occur, and then we'll implement them across the fleet. So that was the Oyster Creek issue. Next slide. All right, building demolition, and I know there's some questions on this. So our activities are in progress, right? There are a number of tanks that we require also in accordance with the buildings. So removal of systems and components internal to buildings are typically the precursor to some building demolition. So our schedules are being developed, and all demolition activities will require a formal permit from the Village of Buchanan. So like I said previously, current projection for the containment building is approximately 10 to 11 years from now. You know, there are a number of engineering techniques that we can use for building demo, right? And these will be reviewed as plans are developed. We really like this diamond wire cutting. It's demonstrated that the silica and dust generated can be contained. For metal buildings, where we're using mechanical shears, that's with little to no dust generation outside of the immediate construction area. And the majority of our structures are, there are metal structures. And so before we even take those down, we'll go through a facility or go through a structure, make sure all the asbestos is removed. We control that asbestos in accordance with regulations, and then we'll demo the building. So, and then we've had open discussions with some of our local building contractors, so we can also wet buildings down while dismantling. And so I guess the only point here is there's multiple engineered technologies that we can use to demo buildings. We'll look at them all, including tenting, right? But I just don't want to be married to one thing at this point in time. And I will say that, again, this diamond wire cutting, that's demonstrated to be pretty effective. So if we go to the next slide, I know this hurts Tom Carey a little bit, but this was a fab shop we had for years, and we did some dismantling of that. Well, in fact, we took it down, went through the insulation and the asbestos, removed all of it, and removed it just basically with the shears off of a crane. Right now, it's a flat spot there. Next slide. This was an old Unit 3 protected area access facility that we would use during outages when we would bring in a lot of people. And again, you could see we took that down and that's been demoed. What's coming up, I don't have pictures, but what's coming up in the next 3 to 4 weeks is when you come into the property, the first thing you see are oil tanks. Those oil tanks will be taken down, as well as work across the street in the old Con Edison gas turbine facility. So those permits have been just submitted today to the Village of Buchanan. So we're looking to get those authorized and start work soon. Again, those are all metal structures for the most part. We'll use a lot of the metal shear techniques that we've used with these 2 facilities here. Next one. All right. All right, so from I should have labeled this slide a little differently, so I apologize to the team here. Right, but from a discharge to the river perspective, let's call it that, right? So the DEC on October 22nd, 2021, the New York State DEC received an application to renew the speedies permit for IPEC from Holtec. This was required to be submitted 180 days prior to the expiration date of the current speedies permit, and that was that expires April 30th. So we met the 120-day requirement. At the same time, we also requested transfer of the permit to go from Entergy to Holtec, and that was granted February 22nd. Based on its review, the New York State DEC has informed us that the renewal application was timely and sufficient. Therefore, in accordance with the State Administrative Procedures Act, the current permit will remain in effect beyond its current expiration date until the department issues a decision on the renewal application. The New York State DEC will undertake a full technical review of the speedies permit during its review of the renewal application to determine the need to incorporate new permanent requirements under the Federal Clean Water Act and applicable state regulations. That's the state piece. So from a water discharge perspective, there's also an NRC piece, and that's the controlled release of effluents within specified limits has been established part of a normal nuclear facility's operation. And the NRC's regulations and licensing reviews for the facility take into account such releases as part of the NRC's safety and environmental determinations. We have processed waste and unprocessed waste, and that's been discharged to the river in accordance with all state and federal requirements since the units have been in service since 1962. Unprocessed wastewater does not require any filtering since it's clean water. However, we do continuously monitor it. So it included at one time steam generator blowdown. So without the obviously reactors in service, that's gone. But there is a Unit 1 sphere foundation sump that's just a natural spring under the Unit 1 sphere, right? That is relatively clean water. We monitor that, and that gets discharged to the river. Processed waste will currently be from water in the spent fuel pools and the reactor water storage tanks, the RWSTs. Processed waste is also generated by the North Curtain drain system, which is due to past operating history of the Unit 1 spent fuel pool, and that does contain cesium. Next slide. So it's important to note that all water in the spent fuel pools and our RCS and RWST are one and the same. Effectively, they communicated during the refueling outages in the past. The water in the spent fuel pools is constantly circulated and filtered. Its clarity allows for the offload of fuel without obstruction. No water from the processed waste streams are directly discharged to the river. I mean, I think that's a very important point. We just don't dump water to the river. Rather, this water is filtered, housed in collection tanks, circulated. We analyze it, and then it's discharged. I included a simplified diagram. We can go over that real quick. Total number of gallons between the two RWSTs and the spent fuel pools is about 1.3 million gallons. This water will not be discharged until all fuel is cast and segmentation efforts are completed. So again, that goes out to 23, potentially 2024. And then note that during the years of operation, its typical total gallons discharged to the river, both processed and unprocessed, averaged around 55 million gallons. We have about 1.3 million gallons left here. But there is a variable here, admittedly, right? There's a variable, past, present, and future. With the North Curtain drain and the sphere foundation sump, they're weather dependent, right? So if we have a lot of rain, a lot of snow, you'll see those numbers go up. The speedies permit requires the monitoring of boron, lithium, oil and grease, and total suspended solids. The principal radionuclides that are monitored include tritium, iodine, cobalt, cesium, strontium, nickel, manganese, iron, silver, and antimony. Our liquid discharges of radionuclides do not exceed 0.1% of the allowable NRC and EPA limits. We are required to submit an NRC annual radiological environmental operating report with the results of the radiological environmental monitoring program and a radioactive effluents release report every year, both of which are publicly available, and I would encourage people to read it. Next slide. Tom, again, these are all topics you wanted me to discuss. This is a simplified diagram. In the circle would be the process waste, will be the waste from no longer the RCS, but the RWST and the spent fuel pool. You can see it goes into the waste holdup tank, goes into a collection tank. We filter it. We process the waste. There's a post filter. Unit 2 uses waste distillate tanks. Again, they're monitored there. We go through a RAD monitor. The RAD monitor then discharges the water to the discharge canal. Very simplified diagram. The only intent here is to show that there's no direct discharge, or I saw the words dump, into the river. That just does not happen. Okay, next slide. All right. I know there was some interest in the CDI to HDI transition. That started with executive level changes at HDI. In December 2021, HDI exercises termination for convenience rights under the Decommissioning General Contractor Agreement with CDI. Effective January 19th, HDI performs all activities previously performed by CDI at all our sites, including managing and performing decommissioning and spent fuel management activities. I'll just add here that nobody at Indian Point lost their jobs. Just the names on the check changed, basically. Decommissioning resources and technical capabilities remained intact. There were no personal changes on site as a result of the transition. The migration of resources from CDI to HDI is not expected to impact project costs or decommissioning schedules at any of the Holtec sites. Further decommissioning trust fund financial assurances remain unaffected by this transition, another key point. HDI, as the licensee, remains primarily accountable for regulatory licensing and compliance, the outcome of site investigations, responses to NRC requests for information, etc. This change presents an opportunity to streamline and enhance HDI's organizational infrastructure. Next slide. A public outreach. We're getting to the end. So at our last oversight board meeting, I did ask if anyone wants to tour our site to please let me know, and we'll accommodate accordingly. Pretty happy to see that we had about 10 tours, included congressional delegation, community advocates, various New York State Department reps, local politicians like Senator Harcum and Assemblywoman Galef, as well as Mayor Knickerbocker, local fire and EMS representatives, local union leaders, and college students, as well as Mr. Congdon himself. All told, we accommodated about 75 people. And myself and my team here, we really appreciate the interest in our decommissioning efforts. And again, I'll repeat, if anyone wants to tour the plant or have a discussion, please feel free to contact me. We're open, and we attempt to be as transparent as possible. So to this end, on January 14th, Dr. Becker asked if we would work with a group of Columbia grad students who are working on their particular monitoring scheme for the BV school. We fully endorsed the request. I have a dedicated group of folks, about 4 guys, working with the students to come up with the monitoring plan. We've already agreed to provide information from 2 of the Reuters Stokes monitors. We think we have a good idea of the instrumentation needed to accomplish the task. The Reuters Stokes, it's going to have to be a digital conversion, and so we're working out those details there. More to follow, but I'm more than happy to work with Professor Hollander and his students on professional monitoring equipment as shown on the next slide. So if we go to the next slide, there's an air monitor that we typically have used. That would be sort of a grab sample type of device. You'd have to send out the filter paper to get read. The device on the right looks like it could be a real-time air monitor device that we've used previously also. We'll give these instruments to the BV school, and we'll work with the students as far as how we would employ them and come up with the plan itself. Thanks, Tom, for the opportunity to give you all this information. I appreciate it, and that's all I have pending questions.
Rich, thank you very much. You covered all the items I asked you to cover. Really appreciate it. On the school, Columbia University students work. I hope many of them are watching. We really appreciate the enthusiasm, the super smart group. Really encouraged that, you know, the Professor Hollander, who approached us with the proposal, lives in the community, has kids who will go through the school system, and we really look forward to hearing their presentation when the work is completed. That will be, you know, just to be clear, a really important sort of input into sort of the DOB work and the school monitoring working group. We have our agency experts who will review the class's findings and recommendations and take it into account. And, you know, just to be clear, we'll be subjecting that to, you know, rigorous expert, you know, review, including from Dave and others on the DOB. And I hope that it will result in great ideas for how to do the best possible monitoring for the school system. I want to, we are running short on time, and I want to get to allow time for you know, all of the people who registered to speak during the last section of the agenda. But I know that there are questions for Rich before we get to the agency oversight. And I'll just give a warning to everyone that I think we're going to go over time. I hope the DOB members can stay on. We'll probably, at this rate right now, we'll probably go into 9:30 just as a time check. But with that, I want to open it up to the DOB members who may have questions for Rich on what we just heard. Joe Hochreiter, I know you have some questions on dust, so why don't I start with you?
Yeah, thank you very much, Rich. Thanks for both updates. I want to go back to the first set of updates you gave. I believe I heard you correctly saying we're about 10 or 11 years away from dismantling the domes, correct?
Correct.
All right. And what I'm hearing from a number of families in many different venues is around the potential of radioactive dust or particles to be released in the air when dismantling happens of those domes. I know we're quite a bit away, but what we're hearing is the concept of tenting as a mitigation strategy. Is that something that's on the table? Is that something that that you folks will discuss, knowing that we still have some runway in front of us? But for our families at home and you know, the folks who are communicating regularly with us, and vis-a-vis the work with Columbia University, to what degree might tenting be an opportunity to mitigate some of the concerns we're hearing?
It's a possibility, Joe, but like I said in the slide, there are other engineered techniques that mitigate or limit the dust generation that we'll also look at. Tenting the entire dome building, we'd have to look at that. The diamond wire cutting, the diamond wire cutting methodology we're using now, right? With the water cooled system that it uses, we're capturing the dust in the silica. So that's kind of something that we're kind of looking at. In addition, as we're cutting these blocks, we're finding out that they're actually good for free release. In other words, we can use all of that concrete as part of backfill somewhere, but they're not contaminated on the outside and very little contamination on the inside liner, right? But I'm not going to discount tenting, but I'm not a construction guy per se. I would go to the experts on that. We'll look at tenting, but to tent an entire containment dome, we'd have to look at it. I'm not going to rule it out, but I just think there's other engineered technologies we can use to mitigate dust generation.
And Tom, if I could just follow up and maybe bring Dave Lochbaum into that conversation. So Dave, you've been in a series of discussions with us here in this forum, but also our school working group. As a non-expert myself, and perhaps our families watching, what do you advise this group focus on in terms of some of those mitigation strategies?
Well, I think the key to success is similar to what Rich Kuperwitz outlined for pipeline safety. you need to evaluate the hazard and develop a formal plan to manage the risks associated with that hazard, coupled with a follow-up plan to make sure you're following your plan. If you either develop a bad plan or if you fail to follow a good plan, you can end up in a bad place. So I think developing a solid plan and then following through to make sure it's done is a key to success, whether it's dust control or pipeline safety. I think I recently learned that the La Crosse plant, nuclear plant in Wisconsin, was doing some concrete demolition inside containment. And one of the monitoring wells outside detected tritium over the EPA drinking limit. That led them to discover there was a vent path that had not been fully captured. So they corrected that. I think what it showed was that there's a layer of protective measures that all have to fail in order for the public to be harmed. In this case, the monitoring well detected the problem that allowed that problem to be solved before it was exploited into larger consequences. So I think there's a number of things that together manage that risk, or if it's done properly, so that you don't have the outcomes. As Rich Baroni said, tenting is an option, but it's not the only one. I also looked at a number of other plants that went through decommissioning, or even a ISFC at the GE Morse plant in Illinois, and they used tenting as one of the options, but it wasn't the only one. It's kind of like if a hammer is the only tool you have, you use that all the time, but there are other tools in the toolkit, and you try to use the one that's best suited for the application at hand.
And just one last follow-up. I know we need to move on, but Rich, for those families that I'm in regular communication with that are concerned about this, whether it's whatever the mitigation strategy is going to be, can you ballpark for me that if we're 10 or 11 years out from the physical demolition or dismantling of the domes, around what point does the organization start talking about what the dust mitigation strategy will be, so that we're not we're not stressed out longer than we need to be, or what is that timeline for when the organization and the community will start to have that conversation?
That's a good question, but right now I'd have to get back to you on that. I don't want to guess at an answer. Our focus is on the two critical paths that I talked about, and it wouldn't be fair to you or myself if I gave you that question. I will tell you with confidence, right, that we want to get through our critical path.
Okay.
And then once we get through that, then we'll come up with it. But you know what, Joe, I'll look at that and I'll get back to some of the folks here, and I'll see if I get you an answer.
Appreciate that. Thank
Rich,
you.
I want to also just highlight that, there's a lot of activity that could generate dust, and we're all concerned about the containment structures, and that's far off, but there's daily activity that can generate dust, and want to just flag and encourage Holtec to do all of the right mitigation measures on day-to-day activities as well, and talk with the village. I want to talk with the village some more after this, with respect to the permits that it grants, and the local requirements. And then last, just as an observation for the group, I think another value of having our resident inspector will really be, if they're on site on a regular basis, to see it when it happens. To Dave's point, I think there are protocols, there are mitigation measures that will be in place, but they're only as good as they are monitored and followed. And so if we've got someone there that actually sees a problem, they can bring it to the attention of Holtec. And I know Holtec would want to address that as well. And so we can be ahead of things before anything leaves the site. I see a bunch of hands. I want to turn it to Senator Harcum.
Thank you very much, Tom. Rich, thanks for the presentation and the tour. One of the things you said early in the presentation caught my ear. Would like some more detail on it. You said that you applied for an exemption request, something regarding emergency planning. If you could tell us what that is you applied for an exemption for and why you applied for the exemption.
So you first apply for the post-decommissioning emergency plan, right? That's the LAR that we submit. And along with that comes an exemption request. So there's certain things in the emergency plan that are no longer needed once we get past what's called the Zerk fire mitigation, right? So there's a number of issues E-plan activities that I can get you a list of, right? That's in the exemption request that are no longer needed because we're past the Zerk fire window. That's basically what it is.
All right, yeah, let's do this offline because time is short, but I know the community gets very concerned whenever we talk about emergency planning regarding the plant. So if you say there's a method to the madness, let's talk about it offline. That'd be great. Thank you.
And I'll also say, Senator, this is one of the things we've definitely heard from the community as an issue of concern. And, there is only a few hours for this meeting. I didn't get it on this agenda. I think at the May meeting, we should dive deep on emergency plans and emergency preparedness. And that's something I've committed to doing to some of the community members I've spoken with. So we'll have that discussion at a DOB meeting as well. So I'm sure there's work and discussions that we can do between meetings. But that'll be a good topic for May.
Great idea.
Just let me add, this is a routine submittal that all decommissioning plans go through. It's not something that we made up at Indian Point.
Kelly Totoro, I see a hand up.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you, Rich, for your presentation. I'll keep my questions brief. You had mentioned that the discharge of radionuclides do not exceed 0.1% of the NRC limits.
That's correct.
Is that standard a whole text standard that you have put into place? And if so, could you also explain for the board what the NRC standard is?
I think the NRC standard is 25 millirem, if I got that correct. That's the 0.1% has been with us since NIPA days and Con Edison days. So it's always been that standard that we've used. Nothing that Holtec came up with. I'd have to look at what the actual NRC liquid limits are, but I think it's 25 millirem and we're well below that.
Okay. I guess my question is it an internal standard that you've put in place to ensure that you're below the NRC standards?
That's a good question because I asked my environmental person that. It's just something we've always achieved. Let's put it that way.
With respect to those historic discharges and always achieved, one thing Dave Lockbaum is really good at is going through the NRC databases and pulling out the reports. And so, Kelly, I want to suggest that DEC, work with Dave, who can pull a lot of the historic monitoring reports for you all, and you can see that. I hope you don't mind, Dave, my volunteering you for that. But I think it would be useful to the DEC.
I'd be glad to
That
help.
would be great. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Rich.
You're welcome.
That's all from me, Tom.
Thank you. Sandy Galiff, I think I see a hand up.
I do. I just wanted to talk a little bit about page 22 and the transition from the comprehensive decommissioning.
Sandy, if you can hear us, you froze.
I froze?
Oh my gosh.
Oh, am I back again?
Tom?
Am I back? I froze.
We can hear you, Sandy.
Oh, okay. All right. I just wanted to talk about the Comprehensive Decommissioning International. I had thought that Holtec claimed that the expertise for decommissioning was going to come from the CDI. And now it looks like you've separated from the CDI. Could you tell me what you had gained from them by participating with them on the nature of their expertise and how you were going to replace that expertise since you haven't decommissioned, you're just in the startups of all these?
The CDI folks at site were basically former Entergy folks. So those Entergy folks just transferred over to HDI. So we didn't lose any expertise. In fact, most of our guys here 30 years, 25 years. So none of the expertise was lost when we transferred, when the company consolidated and went from CDI to HDI.
But
So, so they perform the same function as they did before.
okay, but Entergy wasn't in the decommissioning business.
Correct.
So I thought you were,
Correct. But
I thought you told the community that, you know, you've got this international group that's trying to help you. And what you're saying to me right now is it was just Entergy employees.
right now, the critical path activities are pool to pad, right? So we've done that since 2004. We have general contractors putting in the asphyxie pad, right? So that's not our expertise. We have that going. We've brought in additional people for vessel segmentation to complement our staff. This was really a consolidation effort that was made at levels above me, Sandy. I can get you additional detail if you want, but this was just really what's the word I'm looking for? Really just a combination of folks. I know that doesn't really answer your question.
No, because I think this goes down to trust what you say and what you do. So
I'm hoping you
I
could
think you
trust
need
me.
to get back to the community on this.
Well, what's the impact to the community?
Well, the impact is, I think for many people in the community, we see a new company come in that hasn't decommissioned anywhere. And we're really glad that they hired you and Entergy people because you know something about the plant. But there wasn't that expertise. So, you know, what we felt you had done is reached out to an international company that's going to help you with this. And now I'm finding out, and the community is finding out that that hasn't happened. And it kind of, you know, the problem is there have been other instances where I don't think Holtec has been upfront. And so, you know, we want you to tell what's going on. And so I think there needs to be a little bit better description of what an international, you know, what that was all about. Or is that just kind of a facade? That's just my view. May not be others.
I understand. However, we are taking a fleet approach to this, right? So when you say we don't have decommissioning experience, that's not true. We've decommissioned, we're in the process of decommissioning Pilgrim. We're well ahead of decommissioning efforts at Oyster Creek, right? And we're an international company. So we've taken that experience also, and that's helped us here at Indian Point. So it's a fleet approach that we're taking, really. Everybody went on mute.
Apologies. I've got a quick question for Dave Lockbaum. I've heard some concerns from some members of the community. We met with Manager Green from Clearwater, for example, who's talked about the speed with which the fuel is being moved out of the spent fuels into dry cask. And Rich gave an update on this, you know, on the schedule there. Question for Dave about the speed with which the fuel is being moved out of the pool. Is it presenting any safety or hazards in your view in terms of the speed with which the fuel is being moved out of pools into dry cask?
My preference would be to have it go faster, as fast as possible, because I think that the safety of the spent fuel is much better in dry cask than it is in pool. To be fair, though, there are some changes needed at Unit 3, like the crane that's being upgraded, that have to happen first, because that's needed to support that movement. So I would like to see the fuel on the pad as quickly as it gets, but I don't want to rush that. So I think it's going at as fast as practical pace right now.
Rich, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I'll add. Yeah. So Holtec has developed what's called a metamic insert, which the fuel goes into what's called the MPC. That metamic insert allows us to store hotter fuel from a temperature perspective. Each cask has a temperature limit, I think, of 40 kW, right? So once that's why we had to add a couple of casks, like I said up front, because we had to shuffle some fuel around to make sure we met the kW limits of all the casks and casks required. But yeah, so like Dave said, we want to get the fuel on the pad as soon as possible. but the design of the cask itself allows us to do that.
Okay. I think there's one more question from Richard Webster. Richard?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I actually have two questions. One, I kind of share Sandy's perspective on the whole CDI thing. I mean, at the time we were told CDI is bringing important, or not CDI, Lavalint's bringing important experience to the joint venture, and now we're being told that doesn't really matter. You know, they were just guys who already had decommissioning experience, or guys who already worked for Entergy who didn't have any decommissioning experience. And you know, the claim that there's a fleet approach doesn't really give me much comfort, because if you don't have experience at any site, then trying to decommissioning 4 sites at the same time is not made any easier. The second thing I'm slightly puzzled about is, my understanding is the Clean Water Act and the Speedies permit doesn't cover radioactive discharges where the radioactivity is regulated by the NRC. So I don't quite understand. I mean, is that right? And if so, I don't quite understand where the whole Speedies permit thing comes in if the concern is discharges of radionuclides that are regulated by the NRC.
Right. So the Speedies permit allows us to discharge to the river, correct? Correct?
It allows you to discharge pollutants to the river, yeah, but the pollutants regulated, but radioactivity regulated by the NRC is not a pollutant.
Absolutely. So we have NRC limits that we have to meet when we discharge to the river. The Speedies permit allows us to discharge.
And Rich, I think Kelly may touch on this a little more in the next portion of the agenda. But it's good. It's an important distinction that, you know, I think needs to be aired out here.
No, absolutely. I mean, Richard's right. I mean, the NRC regulates total millirem we could discharge to the river, right? And we're well below those values, right? The state regulates what we could discharge to the river through the Speedies permit. So we have to be in compliance to both of those regulatory requirements.
Right. I don't quite understand that. Let's go offline and look up the NRC limit, because I doubt if it's a millirem requirement. That's the cleanup requirement, I think, but it's probably a Curie requirement. But anyway, we'll see.
The NRC requirement is 25 millirem.
Dave Lockbaum, is there anything to add to this discussion, or should we move on to the agency oversight?
It is. There's actually both. So both Richard and Rich are right. There's a Curie limit as well as a millirem limit for the pot, because it depends on somebody whether they drink, eat contaminated fish or whatever. So there's a limit on Curie limit on how much radionuclides go out, and then there's a millirem limit on how all those different pathways combine to affect somebody living off site. So it's both. You got to meet both.
I agree.
Thank you for the clarification. Last call for questions on the Holtec presentation. Okay. I want to move on now to agency oversight activities. I'll ask the presenters to please try to speak fast so we can get to the public statement portion of the meeting. First up is John Sipos, the General Counsel to the DOB and Deputy Counsel to the DPS. John Sipos?
There I go. Hope you folks can hear me. I should be off mute. So I'll skip. I'm going to get to this quickly. This is speaking about the tip line system, and as previously discussed at earlier public meetings, the Department of Public Service established a tip line system last year. There are different access portals for tips. They are identified on this page, and the Department of Public Service Office of Investigations and Enforcement monitors this system on a regular basis. To date, we have not received any actionable tips. We will certainly continue to monitor the system on the regular basis going forward. And I think that's, quick overview. I'm going to turn things over now to our colleague, Bridget Freimeyer, who is a utility supervisor here at DPS. Thank you. Bridget?
Thank you. Next slide, please. Thanks. Radiological monitoring continues for the community surrounding the Indian Point site. The existing Reuters-Stokes monitors provide updates every 15 seconds with monitoring information available at the site, the surrounding counties, and at the state. This monitoring program will continue until all spent fuel has been transferred to dry cask storage. Next slide, please. This slide shows a recent view of Reuters-Stokes readings. Next slide, please. DPS staff have made multiple visits to the site since October. While on site, staff have observed decommissioning activities such as nuclear spent fuel inspections, ISFSI construction work, and the enlargement of the equipment hatches through the containment domes of Unit 2 and Unit 3 in preparation for reactor vessel segmentation work. Further, staff have met in person with site supervision to ask questions and raise concerns and discuss upcoming decommissioning work. Consistent with the joint proposal, Holtec has provided staff with daily summaries of all meteorological and effluent safety data, along with spent fuel pool temperatures. There have been no safety concerns to date. With regard to the hiring of a state inspector for the Indian Point site, the Department of Public Service has received interest from many qualified candidates. We are now at the phase of interviewing candidates and are on track to have someone in place in the next few months. Thank you. Let's see here. Okay, can we go back one slide? Just because I think Senator Harckham mentioned something here that I wanted to touch on. Okay, great. Rich mentioned that they had made 2 submittals concerning the emergency preparedness plan at the Indian Point site. New York State and the impacted counties are aware of those submittals, and we have begun our reviews on the Indian Point permanently defueled emergency plan submittals. On the federal side, the NRC review is expected to be complete on that in January 2023. So that's the time frame that we're looking at right now for that. And I just want to note that as of now, there have been no changes to emergency response plans or teams at the Indian Point site. Offsite response is per established emergency preparedness procedures, and that have been in place while the reactors were operational, both internally and externally with surrounding counties and with New York State. Coordinated response exercises and drills continue. Next slide, please. Excellent. Representatives from state agencies have been present at all Holtec monthly project meetings. Holtec reports that the project continues to be on schedule and under budget. As Rich mentioned, the major decommissioning activities planned for this year are the Unit 3 reactor vessel segmentation and spent fuel transfers from pools to dry cask storage. Next slide, please. As Rich stated, Holtec fulfilled the requirements of the 2017 settlement agreement in November 2021. That's shown on this slide. Next slide, please. With regard to federal engagement, New York State has been actively engaged for years with the NRC decommissioning rulemaking. The proposed rule, which is currently out for public comment, will make many changes to the NRC regulations involving decommissioning. The comment end date is May 17th, 2022. Past comments from the state on this topic include March 2016 comments on the advance notice of proposed rulemaking and 2017 comments on the regulatory basis. The Federal Department of Energy is working to develop a consent-based siting process to identify sites to consolidate and temporarily store spent nuclear fuel. NYSERDA provided comments on this initiative this month, March 2022. NYSERDA also filed comments on the NRC's systematic assessment for how the agency addresses environmental justice in its programs, policies, and activities. All of the state comments mentioned in this slide are available to the public. Now I will turn the presentation over to Kelly Turturro, Regional Director at the Department of Environmental Conservation.
Thank you, Bridget. And before I sorry to interrupt the flow, but Tom Kaczmarek, can you be sure that we put all of the past comments on the federal activity that Bridget just alluded to, that we put that on the Decommissioning Oversight Board webpage, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Kelly, go ahead.
Thank you, Tom. I wanted to go through some updates on the DEC Holtec Administrative Consent Order guidelines and requirements under that order. First, the Citizen Participation Plan. This plan ensures public involvement in the review of work plans and remedial action plans going forward. DEC and Holtec have shared some drafts and comments back and forth, and currently a revised draft is under review by DEC staff. Similarly, the Scoping Work Plan, which outlines the overall program of remedial investigation. DEC and Holtec have gone back and forth with review and comments, and an updated revised Scoping Work Plan is also currently under review by New York State DEC. With regard to the Citizen Participation Plan, I wanted to make sure that the public was aware that this document will be in place for the public review prior to any investigative work plans being approved. Once these documents, both the Citizen Participation Plan and Scoping Work Plan, are approved by DEC, they will be made available on a DEC website in addition to the Indian Point Decommissioning Oversight Board website that was created and shared earlier in the presentation. Next slide, please. I also wanted to give an update on the facility permits that are governed by New York State DEC jurisdiction. First, the Speedies permit, as Rich presented before. That Speedies permit, the existing Speedies permit expires on April 30th, 2022. However, as Rich mentioned, a timely renewal application under our regulations was submitted to the department, and therefore the facility, even after April 30th, 2022, will continue to have coverage under the existing Speedies permit, which means that the effluent limits that are contained in the Speedies permit, the facility is required to meet those effluent limits going forward. In the interim, New York State DEC will continue reviewing the permit application and determine if a permit modification is necessary. The Air State Facility Permit, DEC recently issued an Air State Facility Permit to Holtec March 10th, 2022. This was for a new boiler that will provide heat and hot water to the facility. Holtec wanted to install this new boiler in place of 2 older boilers in order to increase efficiency. I hope I've hit on all the discussions that were taking place. I know that Richard asked a question about DEC jurisdiction, and I would agree with Rich's latter response, which was any non-radiological discharges from the facility are within New York State DEC jurisdiction, and would be covered under the Speedies permit. They would be contained. There would be effluent limits contained in the Speedies permit that would govern the level of those discharges. Any radiological discharges are under the jurisdiction of the NRC. And that's all for me. Thanks, Tom.
Well, thank you very much. I think I have one question from Richard Webster. Richard? Or is that an old?
No, actually, that was an old hand. I'm going to take my
Ah, okay.
Sorry.
Okay, excellent. Any other questions, or shall we move on now to receiving public statements from the public? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to turn it over to Tom Kaczmarek. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. To provide a fair opportunity to speak, all registered participants will be given a 3-minute time limit tonight. Your line will be unmuted when it is your time to speak. I believe I've reached out to all speakers now. You should know roughly the order you'll be speaking in tonight. If you pre-registered and are joining us over the phone, remember to please raise your hand by dialing *3 on your phone. Speakers will be cut off if they exceed this time limit, so please pay attention to the timer that will be shown on your screen. Any members of the public who are not able to speak this evening are welcomed and encouraged to use other public comment opportunities, which we will put on our screen at the end of today's meeting, and will again be made available when these slides are posted online tomorrow. With that, our first speaker is Chris Vargo. Chris, you are unmuted. Chris, can you hear us? All right, we will try to reach out to you again, Chris, in a moment. For the sake of time, let's move on to Dan Galenko. Can we unmute Dan Galenko, please? Sangeetha, can we unmute Dan Galenko, please?
Tom, I don't see a Dan Galenko.
He is on the list. You can just give another look.
All right, 1 second.
All right, I think I'm on. Thank you.
Hello. All right.
Okay, I'm off. So look, credit where credit's due tonight. I appreciate the more business-like tone of the meeting. I did have some questions answered that I've been waiting on for over a year, so I appreciate that. I want to emphasize to the board more broadly that just because something is legal doesn't mean it's wise or even the right thing to do. So I'm hoping that if the DOB identifies something that is legal but inappropriate or wrong, they're going to take the right action on that. So I don't want to hear as much about the legalese as what is the right thing to do. And I think the water discharge is the exact thing. So we've heard some back and forth on what the permit allows or doesn't allow, but to the extent that there's cesium or other things that are being allowed into the river as the spent fuel pools are emptied, I think the public needs to know about it. So I would like to hear about what the plan is to notify the public that that's going to happen when it's going to happen. So on the ride home on the Hudson Line today, there was at least a dozen people fishing near Croton. And I think the public, you know, the kayakers off of Croton, the triathletes in New York City, everybody needs to know if this is going to be happening. And I hope there is a communication plan for when this is going to take place. And it has created a bit of a mess in Massachusetts, so I know we have some time, but I hope it isn't put off for too long. I remain disappointed that we're not getting a community member representative on the DOB. You are asking me to put my kids on the very front line of this process and where this risk every single day that something's not going to go wrong. 3 kids in 4 years sitting 4,000 feet, that is real skin in the game. And I couldn't have said it better than Rick Kuperwitz 3 hours ago. He said that it takes one arrogant idiot making decisions in the field, and all your well-laid plans, go out the window, and it creates a much different, more dangerous situation. So it really only takes one thing going wrong to really change our perspective on all of this. And while it's outside your mandate, there's a 42-inch pipeline 400 feet from the school. So again, our concern about the school safety really remains. I'm pleased to hear you talk about the tenting and dust mitigation measures, but again, at 4,000 feet, it's not just great engineering, but great redundancy. So if something goes wrong, again, there's just no excuse for dust to leave the site and hit the school. So, and on that topic as well, there should be high quality air filtration equipment in the school that's close there for that redundancy purpose. And I'd like to hear plans about that. And again, maybe my last point is that I think real-time environmental monitoring is going to cost a lot more than $500K. I've heard it referenced tonight, but that's something that we're going to be focused on, and again, want that reassurance for the school community. That's all I have tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Next, we have Jacqueline Dressler.
Hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi there. Well, I'm glad to have this opportunity to speak tonight. I did want to say that I have some issues and concerns. This company, Holtec, has been involved in some violations. We know there's been in the past, kind of a little bit of a kind of criminal thing. We know that they've done some things that aren't quite right. And so what I'm concerned about is also the idea of this storage and moving of radioactive waste. Right now, the centralized interim storage is against the law. So, I'm wondering what their plan is, because something that's against the law can't be a plan. And so I have a question on that. I have a question regarding, let me just get to it. The fact that there was the fellow who was on speaking about the labor unions, about, this kind of not honoring agreements is very concerning to the community at large. Saying that they had, an international group helping them to figure things out is very kind of like lying by omission, because that's not what they had. I'm very concerned about the children. I'm really concerned about the issues of the dust and the traveling of radioactive particulate matter there in the air. And I believe that really that they would be able to have the money with this great big fund to tent their buildings instead of tenting schools. So that's just a few of the things that I would like to say tonight. There are many more issues. I'm concerned about the fact that we may need to make berms and not to be having, to block the line of sight from the Hudson River. We have issues to think about, with terrorist activities. I've never felt that there's been any really great big safety measures there, and that's still going to be an issue. So I do believe that's something that needs to be planned for. And I do believe that the waste really needs to be kept on site. I will just say in closing that moving waste across the country is putting everyone in harm's way. And then, of course, that waste gets sent to places in Texas and in other areas where the indigenous people are already suffering drastically from mining waste. And we just cannot allow the waste to be moved. So that's all that I'd like to say tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Courtney Williams. You are unmuted, Courtney.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Kaczmarek. Hi, Courtney Williams from Peekskill. I did want to say I was very happy to hear from Mr. Baroni that he now knows how to contact Enbridge, that there's a direct line in the control room, that there are plates over the pipeline. All of that is new since I visited the plant in December and they had no idea who their Enbridge counterparts were, how to reach out to them, didn't feel it was necessary to put plates down, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm very glad that the feedback was given. I hope that Holtec is not still assuming that if the pipeline blows up, they're going to go out there with fire hoses. I hope they now know that that's also not going to be happening. I was not happy to hear that those plates over the pipeline are just tack welded. I'm the daughter of a welder. Tack welding is not for bearing heavy loads like that. So I hope someone is actually going to produce an engineering report showing that that is the proper way to build such a quote unquote air bridge. I did share some of my community's concerns with Mr. Webster, but he didn't cover all of them. I don't know how he picks which concerns warrant coverage in this meeting. We want a community member on the Decommissioning Oversight Board. Our elected officials do a lot, and a lot is asked of them. We want a community member that is not worried about fundraising or any other concerns other than our community. I shared that with Mr. Webster, and I wanted to make sure it got shared at this meeting. I also had shared issues with Holtec's survey of how to do evacuations. It seemed to be a survey tailored to exclude the most vulnerable. It required an internet connection. It was only in English, et cetera, et cetera. Hopefully Mr. Webster can pass those concerns on. I was also concerned about the SNC-Lavalin breakup. So the question is, which is the lie? Was SNC-Lavalin bringing valuable experience, or SNC-Lavalin brings nothing and it's fine that they're gone? Does the loss of SNC-Lavalin change that joint agreement that was so concerned about the finances and the financials of CDI? Does that change anything? It seems like the moment they got the license, SNC-Lavalin took a hike. So what's happening with that? So I've put other questions in the chat. I would ask regarding those questions. You all posted 27 pages of single-spaced text to the docket today. And given that I work full-time and have 2 kids, I didn't get to read it before this meeting. So perhaps in the future, you could post it in advance so the public has time to actually read it. And I would also ask that the Q&A be made public so I can see what my other community members are asking and they can see what I'm asking. I'm not sure why it's kept under this kind of lockdown condition where we're not able to see the same information and have our community all getting the same information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I believe we have Chris Vargo again. Chris, let's give this another shot.
How you doing? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, beautiful. My name is Chris Vargo. I'm a lifelong resident of Vermont, New York. My concerns are a very good meeting, a lot of good information. I'd like to read a letter. My concerns are the economic impact to the area. I sent this letter to several politicians. Why is the city of Oswego getting millions of dollars of state grants as well, enjoying tax revenue from the power plants, while the surrounding area of Indian Point Nuclear Power Facility receives no state money and only receiving $3.2 million of federal money and has to be matched by local taxpayers? Although the Henry Hudson School District and local municipalities will never regain the tax revenue loss from Indian Point, there are still viable options. The first is data centers. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce of the United States says a typical data center brings $243 million to supply chain revenue in the area it is built in, as well as high-tech workers, which hire or have the support of 5 service workers. A solar farm is also another viable option. It could feed the high demand for electricity for residents and businesses alike. And according to the company, Why Go Solar, each acre of land could bring $20,000 to $40,000 in revenue. Another option is energy storage facilities. According to Globe Newswire, most recent market study, the industry is projected to grow to $221.21 billion by the year 2027. All these industries complement one another, and after construction, these facilities the facilities are completed, the impact of local towns would be minimal, unlike restaurants, housing developments that require added infrastructure. We should take advantage of the local infrastructure already in place and persuade the local governments to work with the local partners in the county and the state, such as Sustainable Westchester and NYSERDA, New York State Energy Research and Development Activity. I truly hope the governments around Indian Point are looking to viable options to create jobs and tax revenue that will not change the quiet residential area around Indian Point. That's all. It was a good meeting, a lot of good information. And good luck. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Tina Volz-Bongar. Tina, you're now unmuted.
Thank you. I am going to first address Mr. Kuperwitz. We met with him twice before his presentation, and he didn't include some important facts. And also, I want to reiterate something that Courtney said, because I believe that we gave these issues and these mitigation, the mitigation that can happen to the pipeline to Richard Webster. So I just want to make sure that DPS has the recommendations that Mr. Kuperwitz is making to make the pipeline safer. Next, the risk assessment. He didn't say what he didn't acknowledge what he doesn't want acknowledged or pointed to, which is the risk assessment, because it gives everyone a false sense of security, and it doesn't address the issues that really need to be addressed. Next, he addressed some of the risks from a pipeline expert when he testified to the NRC in March of 2020. So I guess what I should do is I should upload that transcript to the docket so DPS can take a look at that and look at it seriously, because I hear a lot of opinions about what would happen with a pipeline rupture, but not a lot of facts. And I believe Rick Kuperwitz is very good about pointing to the science. So, and I want to point out something that he said, which is about the person who's working on the team who decides to do something else. When Enbridge was building the pipeline, they ignored the person from DPS, I think, who was on site and said, stop. They lost a piece of pipe in the Hudson River, and they went out and they tore out a piece of wetland while they did it. And they didn't even find the piece of pipe that they had lost that they were looking for. So I just want to point out that this is what we're really dealing with. We're really dealing with oversight. And I'm actually kind of angered. I'm grateful and angry to hear that now Enbridge has decided to train the first responders, because the pipeline has been in operation since 2017. And so it's not clear what, yes, they're going to be training Holtec employees too, but they're going to be training first responders. And that's something that we've been asking our electeds. We've asked you, Tom Condon, when is that going to happen? And that's part of their agreement for the operation of their federal agreement. The problem here is no oversight and enforcement. So I'm very, very concerned now, really. And I'm really curious about insurance and who's going to be responsible in the end. I know if an accident happens, I'm not going to be around to say, I told you so. But
Tina, just a heads up, we are at time.
Okay. I want some documentation on this, and I guess I'll go back to the elected officials and ask them the questions again about what's going to go on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Marilyn Ellie. Sangeetha, can we unmute Marilyn? All right, you're unmuted.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm glad you can hear me. I have one question that's been touched on before, but I'd like to be a little more specific about it. Holtec's plan is to ship spent fuel rods to New Mexico, and that does require a change in the Atomic Energy Act, as has been mentioned. If that law is not changed, they will not be able to ship those spent fuel rods, and we can talk about the morality of shipping it to a community that does not want it, and we can talk about many other things. But right now, I would just like to ask, what is Plan B? If this plan to ship things away, there is no away, what is Plan B? I'd also like to know how long they think this plan might take and how long they expect spent fuel to be on site, either under Plan A or an undeveloped Plan B. The second part of my question has to deal with, I think, with communication with the public. Let me put it that way. It's not enough for us to be able to come to you and list these comments and complaints and praises in some time and say, thank you for holding the meeting. What happens to these the questions in the chat? How will they be addressed? When can we see the answers? I understand that you may not want to answer questions off the fly, but when these questions are answered from the community, or they deserve answers. So, Tom, what is the system for answering the questions that people have raised in the chat? How are you going to do that? And I'll stop there.
So we will include all of the questions from the chat in the next Q&A, and I'll also say Courtney Williams' observation that it came late this time is fair, and we'll do better to get the Q&As posted well in advance of the next meeting.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Susan Van Dulsen.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much for letting me speak. And first and foremost is the need for a community representative. Clearly, the person that was asked to convey our messages didn't cover everything that we had, discussed and emailed and talked about. So this was actually part of the bill that was proposed at the state level that Sandy Galiff and Pete Harcum introduced, and we really feel it's a primary need. And I don't know why this is there's a delay or there's no response. The other thing about that everyone's talked about that I really am frustrated with is we can't see the chat. I mean, we're on Zoom all the time and we always can see what other people are saying. It is just a terrible format. It's not user friendly. So those are the first two things. And I want to also ask you about a little more about the cyber terrorism thing, because that kind of was glossed over. And I know that the governor created a Joint Security Operations Center recently, and it's coordinating all different agencies in the state level. We're in a very vulnerable position. This has always been a horrible site to co-locate gas pipelines with nuclear facility. Now there's a war. There's an aggressive nation that is not trustworthy, and we all can agree. And this was a site that was at 9/11 considered one of the targets. And it's just not feeling comfortable. I don't know who on this call could possibly feel that there's a lot of sense of security, coordination. It's been so long since we get any answers. We have to keep asking our elected officials over and over and over again for assurances about coordination between these agencies. So I just certainly hope somebody can answer about what's going on with cyber, protecting cyber from cyber attacks, because gas pipelines like the Colonial Pipeline have been targeted, nuclear facilities have been targeted. And so other people have covered so many of the other things I was going to say, but that was something I just did not want the night to go by without it being mentioned. So I believe that others have covered pretty much everything else. And I just thank you for the time, but don't feel good tonight about what I've heard, honestly. Thank you very much.
Next, we have Susanna Glidden. Susanna, you're unmuted. Yes, we can.
Yes. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Again, WebEx settings for chat at these meetings must allow participants to see who else is attending from the public and their comments and questions. And for the umpteenth time requesting this, we of the Hudson Valley want a fence line community member appointed to the DOB, and that it be Courtney Williams, PhD, a highly regarded scientist with extensive knowledge of Indian Point and the gas pipelines, and a parent of children in the nearby school. Richard Webster is not a fence line community member. He represents Riverkeeper, which is fine, but we must have fence line and EJ community member Courtney Williams appointed to the DOB, and without further delay, please. In spite of the present Ukrainian disturbance that we pray ends swiftly, we want the gas in the 3 Algonquin pipelines at Indian Point shut down immediately. Decommissioning involves excavation and demolition near the pipelines and near the inadequately protected and packed spent fuel rod pools. Shutting the gas off prevents a possible catastrophe from a leak in any of them, leaks that frequently occur in gas pipelines. Iron plates on top of pipeline road crossings in no way prevents a rupture, but would be serious projectiles in a rupture, and deactivated reactors in no way reduces the potential of a cataclysmic fuel pool explosion should a rupture occur. Construction of Indian Point never should have been approved near 2 fault lines and on top of a gas pipeline, with another added a few years later, and recently the massive AIM pipeline. Approval of AIM was based on being able to shut off the gas from the control room in Houston, Texas, in 3 minutes should a rupture occur, but was found to be a false claim. It would take a while to even know a rupture had occurred, and longer to shut off the gas, by which time, God forbid, we'd all be blown to smithereens. Moreover, instead of stored fuel casks lined up like bowling pins broadcasting a target for terrorism, we want them protected the real way, with a hardened surface and berms. Cutting necessary costs mustn't be allowed. We've lived with the untenable danger of co-locating 2 extreme energies at Indian Point for far too long. For the sake and safety of the tri-state area and the entire eastern seaboard, we want the risk removed once and for all, and with no future gas or nuclear facility installed on the IP site or nearby. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Catherine Skopik.
Going to the pipeline. And my question is this. Richard Kuperwitz pointed out again and again that if you assess the situation, if you make a plan and then communicate with each other and follow that plan, you're okay. And he mentioned that 2 or 3 times. And again, when someone else asked the question. So, and that there would be a point person for both Enbridge and Holtec. My question is this. Well, first, a statement that I have been in situations where there's a line of command, as it were, or there's a line of how things should go, who's first, second, how the flow of communication. And more than once, I've seen in situations I've been in and seen it in other situations that somebody down the line doesn't follow the plan. Either they think they know better or they think it's a better idea, whatever it is. So my question is this: would it be possible to have an independent person know each day's plan of work? They know that day's plan of work. They check with Enbridge, the Enbridge point person and the Holtec point person. And this way, the community knows what the plan of work is for that day, because it could be shared with the community if for any reason people want to know. And it would be a double check on that communication, because that's the only thing that Richard seemed to be concerned about, that somebody in the field takes it upon themselves to not follow the plan. So if this is the one thing that we can do to double check or guarantee, or something close to a guarantee, that there is not going to be an accident, could we please have an independent person taking care of this? And the meeting started off by saying that there's going to be money for an independent inspector. So would it be possible for this to be an added job for that person who can be hired? Let them know what the day's work is, check with each point person and check on the work. And if this is the one thing that we can do to make sure there isn't going to be an accident, it's easy to do, and it behooves us to be smart, to be wise, and to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Dana Goyer. Dana, you're unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you to all the fellow community members who spoke today. You spoke so well, you spoke from your heart, and you definitely put a lot on the table for this group to consider, and I hope each and every one of them consider it. I will keep my comments brief, and I may cry. I'm a parent, I'm a cancer survivor, I'm 41 years old, my husband's a cancer survivor, and my children live here with us and go to school in this district. Please think of your children, if you have any, each and every day when you do work on this committee. If you spend 1 minute a day on this committee, on activities here, you put your children's pictures in your mind and you think of them and you think of our children each and every day at our respective schools and you think about protecting them. Tenting should certainly not be shrugged off like it was today. It is safety, and it can provide some security to us who send our children to the buildings, and we would feel better about that knowing that the tent is there. Monitoring, when will it happen? It needs to happen sooner rather than later. I am scared for my children each and every day. This world has become a terrible place. The golden rule is not followed, and I hope that each of you have on your conscience my children, the children of the fellow members of the families that live here in Buchanan, Verplank, Montrose, Krugers, Croton, Cortland Manor, all of us, because at the end of the day, something happens. I don't want to hear you say, we should have done it. I don't want to hear you say, we missed that. Protect our families. Protect the people who've lived here for generations after generations. You have a serious job, and I expect each of you to hold a promise to your hearts to protect our families. Lastly, thank you, Sandy Galiff, for calling out about the lack of knowledge. And while Holtec, former entity, certainly has done some decommissioning, some of this is new for you. So don't act as if it's a run-of-the-mill project for you that you can just do blindly. This is serious business, and I expect each of you to take this as seriously and take our safety and bring our safety to the top of mind and have that be a point of conversation each and every day when you meet. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Next, we have Manajo Green. Manajo, you're muted. Yes, we can.
Can you hear me, Tim?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I want to start by thanking the Decommissioning Oversight Board. I think in many ways this is a model for the rest of the country. I also want to share the concern of the unions for being misled, and given Holtec's history of malfeasance and, outright lying, and, not just in the United States, in Canada and other places around the world, I'm afraid this is another example of why it is so important that the Decommissioning Oversight Board provide proactive oversight. We worked very hard to ensure a just transition, and really want to see that commitment restored. I think the fact that energy workers were kept on is a good thing, but it needed to be supplemented by experience, and it sounds like that didn't really happen. Decommissioning experience, they certainly have site experience. The other thing I commend is the idea of the resident inspector, and I agree with a previous caller that whether it's a 5-day notice, a 10-day notice, or a change in the field, that the resident inspector be notified and that everything be put in writing. And then the other thing, I heard mention of damaged fuel being moved to Cass. I'd like to know more about that. That is a grave concern. And I want to say something about radioactive isotopes. There was a desal plant proposed for Haverstraw, and in the pilot, they found radioactive isotopes on both sides of the reverse osmosis membrane, 3.5 miles to the southwest of Indian Point. I don't think either the state or the NRC are paying sufficient attention to exposure to radioactivity in air, soil, or water. And one other thing, well, I'm just going to say solar and storage is the best reuse of the facility. And I ask again, the DOB members do their due diligence, and any other comments we'll submit in writing. Thank you.
Tom K., you were muted.
Sorry about that. Next, we have Michelle Lee. You're unmuted.
Hi there. All right, I'm going to try to be fast. Let me start with just giving you a little bit about my background. You know, when you hear about disasters and all these problems with big corporations, and the company hires a big law firm to go and do an investigation, they come out with a report. Well, I was one of those attorneys involved in those kinds of reports. So let me tell you what struck me as real red flags that arose as I was listening tonight to the various presentations. I may jump around a bit. But number one, TIPS hotline has got to be communicated to every single individual working at that site. You have a site with subcontractors and people moving on and off, you know, in different teams and under different auspices. There's no reason to expect that many of those individuals would know that there's, that there's a TIP hotline. There has to be some mechanism to make sure that that is available, the information is provided, because it is those people, it is those whistleblowers, the subcontractors and so forth, who are the ones that are going to more likely call the TIP line, because their entire career does not depend on the site continuing. So that's number one. Number two, having a point person, boy, is that a bad idea. You need many point people. I guess Catherine Skopik noted that in her comment. I got to tell you, I can't think of a single incident I ever was involved in reviewing, or any of the literature I've ever reviewed, where there wasn't some sort of a snafu, including, by the way, at 3 Mile Island, where a memo landed on somebody's desk, but his wife was ill, so it just got piled up with other papers, and he never read it. That is exactly the kind of real world dynamics that happen with accidents. With respect to the very evasive response by Holtec's representatives about the split up with SNC Lavalin, the issue there is that you no longer have any company with accountability or transparency, with real eyes on what's going on internally in that company. As the Attorney General pointed out in the intervener papers, this is a multiple shell company and it's a black box, and that's something that you really have to take into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, do we have Sanja Levchik on the line? Sanja, if you're on the line, please raise your hand. If you're on the phone, you can dial *3. All right, we will return to Sanja. Same Linda Brunner. Is Linda with us? Okay, next we have Amy Rosemarin.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So we, the community activists, want Courtney Williams on the DOB. She is knowledgeable and we trust her. It's we in the community, you know, we've been the ones who've been focusing on safety for the past 8 years and educating our public officials about what's going on. We're the ones who brought in the experts such as Paul Blanche, whose work revealed all the NRC lies, and Rick, who years ago said a 3-minute shutdown was not possible, and he was basically ignored. And so we want Courtney on the DOB, and that's really important. The next thing is, in addition to a problem that might happen, you know, from a truck, you know, on site going over, or some accident on site, it's really easy to explode the pipeline if somebody wants to. And you guys know all those details, so I'm not going to go into that. And so you need to shut the gas. This is not, there's a war going on, and it's a target. And, you know, it's like, what are you thinking that you would, you know, allow something like that to be happening right now? And then the third thing I want to mention, to ask, is the casks aren't going to go anywhere. And so can you please get a plan, tell us what the plan is, what's going to happen to the casks to make them last longer, since they are not really going to go anywhere. I think that they're only okayed for, I don't know, 25, 30 years, something like that. Could be a little bit longer, a little bit less. But what are you going to do to the casks to make them last longer? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Robert Thomas. Robert, are you with us tonight? Okay, next we have Ellen Weininger. Ellen,
yeah.
you are unmuted, yep.
Yes, good evening. Thank you. So I have a few comments. First, I want to say that I found this meeting more disturbing than any other meeting that has been held by the DOB thus far. First, the recitation, almost like an abbreviated grocery list of the community concerns, I found unacceptable. The union member letter was read out loud. There have been several letters from the community that was not read out loud, and you've heard that community concerns were not represented by Mr. Webster, and there was really no response to it. It was just a laundry list. This is really discriminatory not to have community representation by a resident, a qualified resident from an environmental justice community. They are the eyes and ears on the ground, and deserve representation, and deserve and have the right to be able to express their concerns publicly, directly, on this public platform without being marginalized to the end of the meeting. Secondly, we keep talking about emergency planning but there's conflicting information to the community. It's not, there are language issues that have not been addressed, technology barriers that have not been addressed, and we keep talking about planning, but there's formulating a plan, and there still is no plan, and it's not even implemented. So at this is pretty much a late date for that. The other thing I want to ask is, where is Enbridge? Mr. Baroni from Holtec described how they use ground penetrating radar to determine where the pipeline is, to know where to put the steel plates. That's unacceptable. That is not for Holtec to go around with their equipment to do that. That is for Enbridge. And Enbridge's own website states that though pipelines are identified by above ground markers, the markers should never be used as a reference for the exact location, and the depth of pipelines and other underground utilities can change over the years due to erosion and previous digging projects or uneven surfaces and varying depths. So it is essential that Enbridge be present at this DOB to answer questions. They should be locating and marking the pipeline rights of way, and they should be involved in this process, and they should be involved in all planning and verifying all of these plans that Holtec is putting forth. And again, I know this is, my time has run out, but I just want to say that Mr. Kuprowitz's term that this was encouraging to me is not a glowing comment for what's happening. And I think that this whole process is literally flying blind without any real basis and substantial evidence-based protocols and procedures. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Nancy Van.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, that's wonderful. I have a couple of comments. First of all, I'm very sorry that Rick Kuprowitz isn't still on the call. I don't know if he heard the information from the guys from the unions about what Holtec had promised and what they had not delivered. I think that's a very important point. I also would have asked him about the fact that Holtec had a really very close accident at the San Onofre decommissioning site in California. One of their crew members had almost dropped a canister containing radioactive material. So I would really like to have talked to him about that. But another question I have is about the reduction of safety considerations. One of the guy from Holtec said that it's a routine process, that they reduce safety considerations and processes when they are decommissioning. That seems to me like it's really regulation by exemption. They get these exemptions regularly, but there's been no NRC consideration of whether these exemptions are actually worthwhile. I live about 2 miles from Indian Point, and I used to have laughable. Indian Point evacuation bus stop across from my house, where I was supposed to stand and wait for somebody to come by with a bus and help me evacuate if there was a problem with Indian Point. But there's never been a really good evacuation or any kind of emergency plan. And asking for those plans to be reduced is really, and to say that it's routine, that is illegal. I mean, you can't do regulation by exemption. And I'm very concerned about that. So I hope that the whole tech representative can speak to that. And I'm sorry that Rick isn't here, because I'd like to point out to him that individuals on the ground from Holtec have really had some very close calls in the past. And given their responses to the union and their abrogation of those agreements, I just don't trust them. I'm sorry, I just don't trust them. Why should we?
Tom, you're on mute.
Thanks. Apologies for that. So thank you. Those were all the public speakers we had tonight. Esmond, can we open up the other slides, please? Esmond, I'll see if I can help out here, if that's all right. So okay. In case you were not able to speak tonight, just a reminder, there are several other ways to comment. These options are all available on our website. We will be posting this presentation again tomorrow, which will also highlight these items. But do remember as well that you can go to the new website, dps.ny.gov/Indian Point, which will also provide information on how to comment and as well as all the documents of the Decommissioning Oversight Board. Again, also a reminder specifically on how to sign up for updates. If you want to receive emails every time there's a document posted related to the work of the Decommissioning Oversight Board, please follow these steps. Again, you can go to the website, DPS website. You can go to the dpsny.gov/Indian Point. We'll also provide directions for how to do so.
Tom,
turn it back to you, Tom.
Am I able to speak? Just briefly?
Yes.
Well, thank you. I'm Supervisor Dr. Rich Becker from the town of Portland. And this was a very instructive meeting for me tonight to listen in, something I've been actively involved with since the beginning of these meetings. And I think, there are 2 points to the Indian Point Decommissioning Oversight Board, two areas that were required to carry out. One of them is safety of the community, and the other is making sure that the community is aware of what's going on and also comfortable with the process of oversight. And a few points need to be raised. One was, it was discussed earlier about the students who are involved and whether students are adequate for performing the function. So I just want to clarify that a little bit. State has allocated funds to the Hendricks-Hudson School District to provide monitoring during the decommissioning process. But the question was raised, what should be monitored and how often and where should it be monitored, particularly in proximity to the BV school district. So to this point, I had identified a neighbor, Jonathan Hollander, who happens to be a professor at Columbia, and this happens to be his area of expertise, and he happens to be involved in a training program with graduate students. So these are not like high school students or college students. These are folks who have expertise in planning careers in environmental sciences. And Professor Hollander is an expert in environmental sciences. So he is going to help us define what should be monitored, how frequently, where, what equipment, and that's the scope of the project. And that is just really for informational purposes that will be handed over when the report is completed to the Hendrick Hudson School District. So they will have information what to do when they go out for RFPs to various companies to provide these studies. And so I think it's just a way of involving the community directly, since Mr. Hollander has young children who will be attending these schools and has a lot of interest in this, not only the field, but he has personal skin in the game, as we say. The second comment I wanted to make is the importance of having the independent monitoring. So I'm very glad that that's happened. I think that's going to solve a lot of questions and give people in the community confidence that there are independent professionals who will be monitoring the process outside the state and outside of Holtec. So I think that's an important thing. And then finally, we need to respond to the community. And there's really no reason why Courtney Williams, who seems to be the universal choice of the public to be on this oversight board, I believe everyone here would welcome her. And so Courtney, if you're still here, please reach out to me, and you and I and the Toms will have a conversation, and we'll make sure that that happens, because all of this is pointless unless the community is convinced that their voices and their questions and their concerns are being addressed through the appropriate avenues. So I'm sure we'll all welcome Courtney to this panel. And that's it. Thank you for holding this. And the next one we will hold in Town Hall. It'll be in May. And everyone who's Zooming in or can certainly participate in person. But we'll also set it up as a hybrid if we can, so that those who cannot attend in person can still listen from home. And that's all my comments. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Well, thank you, Rich. As you said, next meeting is May 19th, and we are way past time. I really greatly appreciate all the presenters today, the discussion of the DOB, and all of the comments we received from the public. We'll be taking those into account. As I said, we'll be responding to the questions we received tonight in our normal written Q&A and have that posted well before the next meeting. So with that, thank you all again, and this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.